Chapter 301. Plot twist. Fourth Master, do you want to get married? The night was dark and calmingly quiet. In the hall of the bamboo garden, Jean's pleasant female voice rang out and echoed. Edward's hand, which was holding the wine glass, froze mid-air. Jean was holding his hand, asking him very seriously if he wanted to accompany her to bed. Well, should he? He just kept looking at Jean. Jean had also waited for a long time, waiting for Fourth Master Swan's answer. It seemed she would accept any answer. Silence filled the space. Jean did not know how long it had been, but she felt like a century had passed. At that moment, she heard Fourth Master Swan say, "No." That one word, "no," rang out loud and clear, rejecting her. She felt a knot in her heart. That was right, a knot in her heart. Then, the corners of her mouth curled up into a smile, and she let go of Fourth Master Swan very naturally. Edward also drank his wine very naturally. His gaze was no longer on her. "Fourth Master, are you really not going to reconsider?" Jean asked. She was not in a hurry to leave but to confirm his decision. Seeing Edward nodding his head, she nodded her head gently too. "In that case, rest early, Fourth Master." With that, Jean walked away from the bar counter as if it did not matter to him. Without showing any emotions, she left. Edward's eyes shifted a little as he watched her leave. She did not have any lingering feelings, nor was she reluctant to leave. He downed the wine in his glass. Who would have known that when he said the word, "no," his heart was torn? When Jean opened her eyes the next day, George was not there again. However, she was now used to it. George was also used to it. In the morning, he had tiptoed out of bed and did not disturb her. Sometimes, developing a habit was really a scary thing. She clearly never had the habit of sleeping late, but she developed it here. She stretched her body. It was past 11 o'clock in the morning again, so she got out of bed, washed up, and went downstairs. She had just opened the door when the melodious sound of a piano resounded in the villa. Jean frowned. Fourth Master Swan was interested in listening to George play today. Well, it had been a long time since she had heard him play as well. With that, she took her time going downstairs. In a corner of the hall, there was a black grand piano. As Jean walked over, she was slightly startled. The one playing the piano was not George, or to be precise, it was not just George alone. Fourth Master Swan was playing too. They played together with 4 hands. At that moment, Jean instantly noticed that pair of slender fingers moving agilely. The melody of the piano, beautiful and moving, rang out in the villa. It was her first time knowing that Fourth Master Swan could play the piano. Of course, many young masters in the upper class could play the piano. Eden could also play the piano. It was just that she did not know him too well, and because the public had such a fixed view of Fourth Master Swan, they thought he would not have any interests, hobbies, or so-called specialties. She stood not far away and watched him. In fact, she knew nothing about playing the piano. When she was young, she did not learn any musical instruments because her mother doted on her. However, because of George and his talents, she eventually learned a thing or two about it when he was learning the piano. Hence, she could roughly tell that Fourth Master Swan's piano standard should not be low. After all, with George's current standard, it would be hard for someone who was not a professional to keep up with the speed of George's fingers. She just stood there, looking at the two of them, one big and one small, but there was no conflict between them. Her eyes moved slightly. Although she was just a few steps away from the piano, she turned around and left. Edward looked up at Jean's back and watched as she turned around coldly. 1 wrong note. George frowned. 2 wrong notes. George's small eyebrows furrowed even more. More wrong notes, again and again, and it kept on going. George turned to look at Fourth Master Swan. Fourth Master Swan looked back. His fingers stopped, and the sound of the piano faded. George also stopped and was, in fact, a little unhappy. Playing the piano was the only thing he could accept doing with Fourth Master Swan. He was a little unwilling at first because he admitted that he, a genius child, occasionally has his pride. He just felt that if they were to play with 2 pairs of hands, normal people would not be able to keep up with his rhythm. However, because he was living under someone else's roof, he had to compromise. He did not have any hope for Fourth Master Swan at all. In the end, he was shocked. He even thought that the speed of Fourth Master Swan's fingers was faster than his. After all, the latter's hands were big, and his fingers were very long. The scale that Fourth Master Swan could cross was much bigger than his. For the first time, he played very happily. Chapter 302. Plot twist. Fourth Master, do you want to get married? However, halfway through, Fourth Master Swan stopped abruptly. That was when he heard Fourth Master Swan say, "Play by yourself." After that, Fourth Master Swan left his side. George bit his lip. He refused to admit that at that moment, he did not want Fourth Master Swan to leave. Hence, he lowered his head and started playing by himself. The melody of the piano was still there, but he thought it felt a little monotonous. In the hall, George was playing the piano while Jean was on the sofa, looking at her phone. Tomorrow was the deadline. She was looking at the ticket to leave tomorrow when she paused because she felt that someone had sat down beside her. She put down her phone and looked at Fourth Master Swan. Was he not playing anymore? He was playing pretty well. However, she did not say anything. Instead, she heard him say, "What does George like to do?" Jean was stunned. She was a little surprised by what Fourth Master Swan said. For him to suddenly ask about George, she replied, "He likes to code." Neither she nor Kingsley had forced George to code. It was just George's hobby. To be precise, all of George's current skills were his hobbies, and she had never forced him into learning anything. "Will he like the amusement park?" Edward asked. "No." However, she said, "You can try." That was because she had never brought George there before. Back then, she had a lot of things to do overseas, so she could not spare much time to spend with George. Besides, George did not like to go out either. "Let's go to the playground in the afternoon. You can go and prepare to head out." Edward left after saying that. Jean stared at his silhouette. There was nothing to prepare for going to the amusement park. She turned her head and looked at George, who was not in the mood to play. George was probably not interested in the amusement park at all. However, after lunch, they still sat in Fourth Master Swan's luxurious car and left Bamboo Garden. It was the first time Jean saw Fourth Master Swan in such casual clothes. He was wearing a gray t-shirt, a pair of black jeans, and a pair of white sneakers. His hair was obviously not well groomed, and it hung down naturally. It was even a little messy. Nevertheless, it was undeniable that a good-looking person would look good no matter what they wore or how they wore their hair. In fact, she thought that the simple set of clothes he wore was of higher quality. She knew that even though Fourth Master Swan's clothes looked simple, they were not cheap. Eventually, the car arrived at a large-scale amusement park in Southampton City. It was not a weekend, so the amusement park was not crowded. However, there were still quite some people who came and went. All of them were a family or a couple. After Edward led Jean and George out of the car, he told the driver to leave. Then, Edward personally went to the amusement park's ticket counter to buy the tickets. Jean stared at his back and then turned around to look at her surroundings. At that moment, George looked at the amusement park behind the main gate. "I don't like this place." Jean knew that would be the case. With that, she squatted down to the same height as George and told him, "Bear with it." George nodded. Jean smiled and stroked George's curly hair. Having bought the tickets, Edward walked over to them. Jean stood up and followed him into the amusement park. In the amusement park, there were all kinds of large-scale entertainment facilities, and as soon as they entered, screams filled the air. Jean held onto George's hand and followed behind Edward. They did not know where he was heading toward. However, it was a large amusement park anyway, and he walked in front to lead them while they followed behind him the entire time. They walked for at least half an hour. By then, George's small brows had furrowed. He disliked outdoor activities the most. He really disliked it. Jean could also feel George's displeasure, but looking at Fourth Master Swan's determined footsteps, she held it in again and again. They walked for another 10 minutes or so before the long legs in front of them finally halted. Jean and George could finally catch their breath. She was still feeling all right. Although Fourth Master Swan's legs were very long, she could walk fast. However, it was really too strenuous for George. He did not like to exercise, to begin with, and his legs were short. Basically, he could only keep up by walking and running. "I've never been to the amusement park before," Edward suddenly said. Jean was stunned. Could it be that the big shot did not know what to do in the amusement park, and that was why he brought them on that crazy journey? Edward felt a little awkward being stared at. At that awkward moment, Jean asked, "Do you want me to bring you around?" Edward nodded. "I haven't been to a place like that in a long time. The last time I came here was with Eden." Chapter 303. Plot twist. Fourth Master, do you want to get married? A certain person's expression changed slightly. Jean, on the other hand, was calm and composed. In fact, she was stating a fact. She said, "George is still young, and there is a limit to what rides he can go on. He can't go on roller coasters, drop towers, pirate ships, and so on. If you're interested, I can accompany you." fourth master, and George can wait for us outside. No need. Just pick the rides George can go on, Edward said straightforwardly. In that case, let's go to the children's area. The rides there are mostly for children. Edward hummed in response. With that, they reached an agreement. Jean walked to the front and looked at the amusement park signboard. By following it, they soon arrived at the children's area. There were carousels, bumper cars, lower high-altitude rides, children's roller coasters, children's drop towers, and so on. George was against it. He was against every ride, but he still reluctantly went to all of them. On the contrary, Jean was the one who had fun the entire time. Although it was not as thrilling, it had been a while since she had been to a place like that. She even missed it a little. They had gone on every single ride in the children's section. Do you want to ride the Ferris wheel? Jean pointed at the large Ferris wheel far away and asked. Edward nodded. However, George did not want to go. He could see that the Ferris wheel was still far away, so he did not want to go. He felt he had walked more today than he had over the past 6 years. Jean could naturally tell that he refused to go. Therefore, she smiled and said to George, the Ferris wheel is something every woman can't say no to in an amusement park. Can you keep me company? George was not happy, but he listened to her obediently and then nodded. Seeing that George had agreed, Jean dragged George toward the direction of the Ferris wheel. Just as they were about to leave, someone suddenly lifted George into the air. Jean was slightly startled as she watched Fourth Master Swan pick George up from the ground. George was not young anymore. He was 6 years old and did not need to be carried. However, Fourth Master Swan was too tall. On him, George looked tiny, so tiny that it did not seem out of place. Jean remained silent. Seeing Fourth Master Swan carrying George from behind had stirred up some emotions in her. Yet, she pursed her lips and caught up to them. George was actually a little embarrassed. After all, he was not young anymore, and in his memory, he had barely been carried like that. At that moment, being carried by Fourth Master Swan like that. Fine, he was really too tired and did not want to walk anymore. Besides, Fourth Master Swan's body made him feel very safe. He struggled internally for quite a while, and that struggle was written all over his face. Yet, in the end, he gave in and lay on Fourth Master Swan's shoulder. Jean thought that George would at least resist or show signs of resistance. However, she did not expect he would lie on Fourth Master Swan just like that. He even took the initiative to hug Fourth Master Swan's neck and put his head on Fourth Master Swan's shoulder. As for the man who was being hugged tightly, his body tensed up. Jean could not see his expression because he was walking in front of her. However, she was moved by his gesture. After walking for about 20 minutes, they finally arrived before a huge Ferris wheel. As it was not yet nighttime and there were not many people, they could get on the ride without queuing up. Jean and George sat on one side, while Master Yan sat alone on the other side. The Ferris wheel slowly rose, continuously rising. George was leaning on the glass of the Ferris wheel, looking at the scenery outside. It was probably his first time sitting on it, so his childlike curiosity was activated. At that moment, Edward and Jean were also looking outside the glass. It was very quiet inside the small Ferris wheel. Amidst the quietness, they could feel the Ferris wheel slowly rising. Has eldest young lady Lawrence and Eden been on a Ferris wheel before? Edward suddenly asked. Jean was stunned. Nonsense. Among those in a relationship, only a few and far between had never been on the Ferris wheel before. Jean did not answer his question. In fact, Edward was well aware of that. I seem to have missed out on a lot of life, Edward said softly. Jean looked at him. Fourth Master, you did not miss out on life. It was just brilliant. After all, no one could catch up to you. Is that so? Edward said calmly. However, there was no emotion in his voice. You might not know, but the truth is that none of us dare to get close to you because we feel like you were born superior to us. Jean was telling the truth. For a long time, she felt that Fourth Master Swan was unapproachable. Edward did not respond. As such, Jean continued to speak. I first saw you at my mother's funeral, and you left a deep impression on me. I thought you were too high and mighty and worlds apart from me. However, I don't think you remember me. You probably didn't even see me at that time. Chapter 304. Plot twist. Fourth Master, do you want to get married? Edward's eyes moved slightly. The girl kneeling on the ground with tears in her eyes and crying her heart out. He saw her very clearly. Anyway, you don't need to regret missing out on anything. The time you missed out on is a lot of the time we wasted. There is nothing to be envious of. Jean comforted him. That was the truth. The so-called good times they had might be the times Fourth Master Swan used to make himself more outstanding. The Ferris wheel slowly rose into the sky and slowly descended. After that, the three of them got down from the Ferris wheel. It was not very exciting. It was just a dull ride, and they sat through the entire journey. They had just walked out of the Ferris wheel when a clown stopped them and performed in front of them. George looked at his performance curiously. The clown's performance went on for a while, and when he was done, he elegantly took out a photo and a rose. He handed the rose to Jean, who accepted it and smiled. "Thank you." Then, he passed the photo to Edward, who also accepted it, and suddenly raised his hand. Edward was puzzled as he looked at the clown gesturing. However, he still could not understand. Jean quickly took out her phone. "Is it $50? The clown nodded and beamed. "I'll pay via QR code," Jean said. The clown comically took out a QR code from his trouser pocket. Once Jean had paid, the clown handed the photo to Jean, who received it and took a look. She saw her, George, and Fourth Master Swan sitting on the Ferris wheel. She did not know when the photo was taken, but in it, Fourth Master Swan was looking deeply at her from the side. At that, she pursed her lips. Edward was also looking at the photo. Jean smiled cheerfully. "Fourth Master, do you want it?" If he did not want it, she would keep it for memory's sake. "I want it," Fourth Master Swan said resolutely. Therefore, Jean passed it to him. She could do without it too. Fourth Master Swan took the photo and glanced at it a few times before putting it into his trouser pocket. Then, he bent down, picked George up, and walked ahead. George, who was being carried, was more used to it this time. Out of habit, he put his head on Fourth Master Swan's shoulder again. Jean, on the other hand, stopped in her tracks to turn her head and look at the sun that was about to set. With her lips pursed, she strode forward to catch up with them. "Fourth Master, is there anything else you want to ride?" Jean asked him. "What about you?" Jean hesitated for a moment. "I want to go to the haunted house to take a look." "Okay." Fourth Master Swan nodded and agreed, so Jean brought them to the haunted house. Since George was too young, he was not allowed inside. Fortunately, the facilities were well equipped with places for children to play, and the service was thoughtful of parents. There were also dedicated caretakers to look after the children so the parents could have some fun. George did not like those games, so he gladly waited for them in the amusement park. While Jean and Fourth Master Swan were queuing up, Jean asked, "Fourth Master, are you afraid of ghosts?" "No, Eden once said that he wasn't afraid either," Jean said bluntly. Edward's face stiffened, but after he went in, he was so scared that he became a ghost. Edward was unmoved. "But I believe you, Fourth Master, are not afraid." Of course, he was not. With that, Jean and the Fourth Master walked in. Only 6 people could enter at a time. The 4 people in front of them were a group of friends who looked like young, energetic university students. Once they entered, they started to fight and walk away. Hence, only Jean and Fourth Master Swan were left walking behind at their own pace. The haunted house was very dark. The eerie-looking lit-up areas in the surrounding paired with the scary music created a terrifying atmosphere. The two of them took a few steps before Fourth Master Swan stopped. Jean looked at his feet. "White bones," Jean said and then added, "It's fake." The two of them walked forward again until Fourth Master Swan stopped in his tracks again. Mirror illusion. The two of them continued forward. It was very dark and quiet inside, as if they were in a dead space without air. Fourth Master Swan's footsteps were visibly a little slower. She could even sense that his breathing had become much heavier. They both felt their way through as they walked in the seemingly endless wilderness. Just then, a cold wind blew. In the quiet space, Suddenly, a white figure fell from the top of their heads. Fourth Master Swan instinctively threw out a fierce punch. At that moment, he took a few steps back. Chapter 305. Plot twist. "Fourth Master, do you want to get married?" He must have been scared even though he did not scream out loud. Luckily, it was just a dummy. Otherwise, that punch would have turned a man into a ghost. After that, Fourth Master Swan's footsteps began to slow down, and he became increasingly tenser. At that moment, a warm little hand suddenly held his fist-clenched hand. Edward turned his head over, but in the darkness, he could not make out much of Jean. Jean said, "You'll feel better this way." In fact, she also could not control her fear anymore. As soon as she said that, a figure floated past them. "Ah!" Jean screamed, clearly frightened. Suddenly, Edward hugged her in his arms, and their bodies pressed together tightly. "Keep going," Jean reminded. She was considered very brave. Although she was still a little frightened by the horror happening here, she was doing much better than a few years ago. She held Edward's hand tightly, and Edward also held hers tightly. Both of their attentions were focused on their surroundings, and they were very careful. Ah! Jean screamed again because someone had touched her. Edward began to tremble as he, too, was frightened. Just like that, the two of them finally walked out of the frightening environment. When they walked out, both their hands were still clinging tightly to each other. Jean's little face was pale with fear, but Fourth Master Swan was not much better either. The two of them followed the crowd and walked out. Do you come here often with Eden? Jean was still in shock and had yet to come to her senses. Did you also walk out with Eden like this? Edward's tone was neither cold nor warm. Jean was speechless, to say the least, and she thought, so what? She lowered her head and looked down at Fourth Master Swan and her tightly held hands. Eventually, she replied, yes. A certain someone's expression changed. She did not lie to Fourth Master Swan. She and Eden were most intimate in the haunted house. It was probably the reason why Eden would still drag her into the haunted house even though he would be scared to death every time. Back then, Eden was sincere to her. Otherwise, she would not have liked him that much back then. She would not have been so unwilling to go to that extent. Now that she thought about it, the thing that she could not accept the most when she found out that Eden and Jasmine had cheated on her 7 years ago was why Eden was seduced by Chao Wu. She had always thought that besides her, Eden was not interested in anyone else. As expected, she thought too highly of herself. The two of them suddenly fell silent until a staff member dressed in festive clothes walked over with an enthusiastic expression. Sir, buy a cup of hot chocolate for Miss. It'll warm her heart and calm her down. Then, she won't be afraid anymore. They both looked at the staff member in front of them. Slowly, Fourth Master Swan let go of her hand. There were actually sweat stains on each other's palms because they were scared out of their wits. Did Eden buy one for you too? Fourth Master Swan asked. Jean could not help but laugh. Are you jealous? Edward sighed. No, no. What a joke. However, she saw through him and said with a smile, I'll go buy it. I'll go. Edward immediately followed the staff member to join the queue while Jean waited for him at the side. She noticed that he stood out among the crowd and could point him out at a glance. At that moment, she could hear a few young ladies beside her discussing, he's so handsome. He's too handsome. Another one echoed, is he a celebrity? A celebrity will definitely wear a mask. Besides, I would have recognized such a handsome celebrity, the young lady said confidently. That's true. However, what a pity for him not to become a celebrity with such a handsome face. If he becomes a celebrity, I will definitely be his loyal fan. Me too. The little girl's heart was moved, and so was Jean's. No, she was moved but not in that way. Therefore, when she saw that Fourth Master Swan was already in line, she turned around and left. It was not that she did not want to trust his promise, but people like them would not let go of an opportunity when there was one. With that, she quickly left and disappeared into the crowd. After Edward bought the hot chocolate and turned around, he could not see Jean anymore. He just stood there, in the same spot Jean had just stood for a long time. Seeing him standing there, the few little girls beside him were a little puzzled but excited. Chapter 306. Plot twist. Fourth Master, do you want to get married? I wonder who he's waiting for. I wonder who's so lucky. Oh, don't you guys think he looks like an overbearing CEO who has been abandoned by his petite wife? You read too many novels. That was right. He was abandoned. After Jean left Fourth Master Swan, she went straight to the children's area. There, she picked George up and dashed out. George was, in fact, not heavy, so Jean could also carry him easily and leave as fast as she could. Where's the Fourth Master? George was a little puzzled. Jean seemed to have paused for a moment before saying, we'll leave first. We'll leave to Southampton City now. Oh, seemingly having understood something, George lay quietly in Jean's embrace. They quickly left the amusement park in a taxi and went straight to the airport. As soon as they got in the car, Jean dialed Miles' number. She said, bring Knox to the airport. We're leaving right now. Right now? Yes, right now. Jean put down the phone. The moment she put it down, she took out another phone, which belonged to Fourth Master Swan. In reality, she had it all planned out. The reason she wanted to go to the haunted house was to take the Fourth Master Swan's phone from him without alarming him. Therefore, even though she was scared out of her wits, she had another motive for approaching him. In such a dark place and in such a tense atmosphere, getting her way was very easy. Once she got the phone, she could guarantee that at least Fourth Master Swan would not have time to inform others to look for her when she left. Besides, she had observed that the driver really did leave and that no one was following them. Although the amusement park was not far from the airport, the next flight was in an hour, and time was tight. Leaving would be a very difficult task. She maintained her calm but did not dare to relax. After all, she did not know if something would happen midway. That was because she never knew the limit to Fourth Master Swan's ability. It did not take long before the taxi arrived at the airport. Jean held George's hand and rushed in. In the huge airport, she dialed Miles' number while she went to buy a ticket. She waited at the airport ticket counter for a few minutes when Miles walked over with Knox. Their hands were handcuffed together and covered by a coat, so they looked like a pair of comrades holding hands. Some people could not help but take a few more glances at them, thinking who wore the pants in the relationship. When Knox saw Jean, he was a little surprised. Isn't there one more day left? By then, Jean had gotten Miles to buy the plane ticket with his passport. She answered nonchalantly, "You still want to be held hostage for one more day, huh? Did Fourth Master Swan let you go early?" It did not make sense to him. Fourth Master Swan did not seem like the kind of person who would give up halfway. However, Jean did not answer him. She quickly settled the plane tickets and led George to the security check. Since they were flying business class, the security check was not packed with people. That was when Jean said to Miles, "Let him go, we're going in." Miles took out the key and unlocked the handcuffs on their wrists. Knox rolled his wrist around unconsciously. Having been held hostage by that guy for 6 days was simply his greatest humiliation. The next time he met that guy, he would definitely kill him. Knox was still secretly displeased until he saw that Jean and the others had already walked in. They really did just turn around and leave. No matter what, they had somewhat of a revolutionary friendship. How could they leave without saying goodbye? Jean was really too cold-blooded. At that thought, Knox turned around and was about to leave. However, he could not help but sigh. It was a pity that he had sacrificed so much, yet Fourth Master Swan still could not keep Jean by his side. "Knox." Behind him, Jean's voice suddenly sounded. Knox hurriedly turned his head to see Jean striding toward him. What? She could not bear to leave, huh? She did not want to leave, huh? He looked at Jean arrogantly as she walked to him and handed him a black phone. Knox frowned. "This is Fourth Master Swan's. Please pass it to him." "Why is his phone with you?" Knox was surprised. However, Jean did not reply to him. Instead, she turned around and was about to leave. "Jean." Knox stopped her. "You didn't steal it, did you?" "I did." Jean nodded, to which Knox frowned even more. "So, please pass it to him for me. You really did everything you could to stop him from coming after you." Knox was not stupid and could immediately figure it all out. Again, Jean did not reply to him. "Doesn't it hurt you to scheme against someone you like?" Knox was a little angry, and it was really hard for him to conceal his anger. Chapter 307. Plot twist. "Fourth Master, do you want to get married?" "I did it to protect myself. So it wasn't Fourth Master Swan who let you go. It was you who sneaked away again." Knox was certain of it, and Jean did not refute it. "Fourth Master Swan never breaks his promises." Knox enunciated each word. Jean kept silent because, at that moment, she knew she was not in the right and could not defend herself. She simply turned around and left. There was no need to explain herself. In any case, she would not come back here after she left. Whatever happened here would stay here. With that, she walked forward. "Jean, without Fourth Master Swan's permission, no one can take away what belongs to him." Knox shouted behind her, without forgetting to add, "no matter what." Jean's body froze, but she eventually pursed her lips and left. Knox watched as Jean entered the security check and completely disappeared from his sight. How cold-blooded of her. However, her leaving was also a good thing as it would save Fourth Master Swan from all the heartbreak in the future. Just like that, he turned around and walked out of the airport, where he took a taxi and left straight for Bamboo Garden. He thought it was a good idea to have a good laugh at the victim. The moment he walked into the hall, he saw Fourth Master Swan sitting on the sofa, expressionless. Fourth Master Swan did not react to him coming back either. "Aren't you curious why I came back?" Knox sat down next to Edward. "It's useless, you would have come back eventually." Edward was indifferent to his return. Knox was fuming. Was that what they called burning bridges? It was simply outrageous. Forget it. He would not argue with someone who had just broken up and handed the phone to Edward. "Jean wanted me to pass it to you." Edward glanced at it, took it, and placed it on the sofa casually. "You tacitly allowed Jean to leave, right?" Knox leaned on the sofa and asked lazily. Edward did not answer. In fact, there was no need to answer that question because Knox knew. Jean was not reluctant to leave at all. Knox said bluntly, "Stop thinking about her. She really doesn't have any feelings for you, so don't waste your feelings on her. It's not worth it." Edward still kept silent. If you think about it carefully, how could Jean be worthy of you? She may be beautiful and capable and have a powerful background, but in any case, her feelings for you are not sincere. Besides, who knows what her relationship with Kingsley is? And she really doesn't have any feelings for you. It's a good thing that she's gone now. If the two of you really do get together, aren't you worried that she'll cuckold you every day? Knox could not be more straightforward. However, Edward was still unmoved. Forget it. On account of your breakup, I won't say much. However, Fourth Master Swan, I feel the need to tell you something. Knox suddenly looked serious. Edward glanced at him. You can't be so abstinent. It's not good for your body. Knox was very serious. Edward refused to listen to him anymore. What I said is true. If you get to know more women and have more sex, you will eventually forget about Jean. Speaking of Jean's figure, I think if I try my best, I can find someone better than her for you. It's fine if you don't want a better match. In any case, as long as you nod your head, anything is fine. There's no need. Edward Said, you can go back now. What I said is true. Me too. You just can't let go of Jean, huh? Edward did not say anything. What exactly did Jean do to you 7 years ago to make you miss her so much? Knox could not understand Edward. They had only slept together for one night. What kind of feelings could he get out of it? Knox had slept with so many women. Once he put on his pants, he would not be able to differentiate between them, let alone feelings. However, Edward seemed to have completely ignored Knox as he got up and turned around to go upstairs. Knox shouted at his back, Jean is such a fickle and cold-blooded woman who isn't worthy of you. By then, Edward was already a distance away. Knox felt that he had expressed everything he could and had comforted Edward as much as he could. Anyway, no matter how hard it was, Fourth Master Swan would be able to endure it on his own. Fourth Master Swan was just that strong. He reckoned that even if Fourth Master Swan was heartbroken right now, nobody could tell, not even him. Nevertheless, it was all his speculation. He did a stretch and figured there was no point in staying here. He might as well find a girl to sleep with and relieve the emptiness of having no woman for a week. Just as he was thinking of that, he turned around and was almost scared to death. Was he F***C King seeing things? Who was the person standing behind him? Was it Jean? Was it the woman who entered the security checkpoint just now and walked away gracefully? Was he possessed? He rubbed his eyes and looked at Jean in disbelief. It's me, the fickle and cold-blooded woman you spoke of, Jean said flatly, confirming what Knox was seeing. Knox was stunned for 2 seconds before he exploded with rage. Why are you back again? He had to leave as soon as possible, so as not to stand in the way of his Fourth Master Swan. I'm back too. Jean grinned. Seduce Fourth Master Swan. Jean! Knox's eyes were bulging out of their sockets. Holding George's hand, Jean walked past Knox's side and went upstairs. Are you crazy? Knox swore. Jean bit her lips and did not answer. To other people, she was indeed crazy. She brought George upstairs and stopped at the door of Fourth Master Swan's bedroom. Then, she lowered her head and said something to George, who left obediently. As he left, he looked at her worriedly. Jean took a deep breath before knocking on the door. The moment the door opened and their eyes met, Jean said, Fourth Master, do you want to get married? Chapter 308. Edward agrees to get married. At the airport, Jean brought George and Miles to the security checkpoint. Soon, they were at the VIP lounge waiting for their flight, waiting to board the plane. After that, they would leave this place behind. Jean looked at the time. She was actually a little nervous. Before they left, she could not relax, and if they really left, she would still have feelings for him. Quietly, she watched as the minutes ticked past. Mom, George suddenly said. At that, Jean turned her head to look at him. George said, are we going to leave Southampton City for real this time? Jean smiled. As you wish, we'll be leaving this time. I don't think we'll ever come back. Oh, George nodded. When he nodded, he did not seem very happy. It looked as if he wanted to say something but did not in the end. In the waiting room, a staff member walked in and said respectfully, Miss Lawrence, it's time to board the plane. Jean nodded in acknowledgement. Then, she held George's hand and followed the staff member out. That was when they saw a group of people suddenly walking into the waiting room. They were dressed in black suits, and it looked like there were at least 10 of them. Jean's eyes narrowed, and at that moment, Miles also felt threatened. The two of them looked at the person in front of them warily. As both parties faced each other, Jean's expression shifted. Was it Fourth Master Swan's people again? She gritted her teeth. This time, she decided she would fight head-on. Her eyes narrowed, and just as she was about to strike back, the phone suddenly rang. Jean paused for a moment, to which the person in the black suit said, "Miss Lawrence, please pick up the phone." Jean frowned. The other party seemed to have a strong aura but no intention of fighting with her. She picked up the phone, glanced at it, and picked it up. "Kingsley. Are you at the airport?" Kingsley asked. "I'm preparing to board the plane, but I'm in a bit of a situation," she said straightforwardly. "I know," Kingsley said, clearly understanding. His tone was also very cold. "What do you mean?" Jean felt that something was amiss. Could it be that the people in front of her had nothing to do with Fourth Master Swan but Kingsley instead? "Stay in Southampton City." Kingsley did not beat around the bush. "Why?" Jean raised her eyebrows. "Weren't you the one who said you don't want me to stay here?" "That was a week ago." Jean did not quite understand. "In short, you can't leave now." "Kingsley. Stay in Southampton City and marry Fourth Master Swan." Kingsley's tone was very cold. "What?" She was speechless. "I've said before, Melody is not the only one in the Sanders. With Melody dead, another person will replace her. Since Melody can't marry Fourth Master Swan, you will marry him." Kingsley made sure to pause between every sentence. "Why?" Jean's eyes turned cold, and her expression was grave. "It's the Sanders' problem that they don't have Melody anymore. If they want to nurture another Melody, they should nurture one of the Sanders. Why should I be the one to replace her? There is no reason why." Kingsley did not give Jean any explanation at all. "What if I refuse?" Jean asked grimly. "You can't refuse." Kingsley's tone was firm, and he said coldly, "This is an order." Jean's hand that was holding the phone tightened even more. At the end of the day, she was just one of Kingsley's professional killers. Whatever he ordered her to do, she had to do it and obey him unconditionally. She bit her lips and did not answer. "Before the mission is completed, you can't come back," Kingsley added. After that, he was about to hang up the phone. "Yet, you still want me to seduce him," Jean enunciated each word. He had once said that he would not let her do such a thing. The other end of the phone went silent for a few seconds. Then, he said, "Jean, this was your choice." Jean sneered. Yes, everything was her choice. Her birth, her experiences, and everything she was experiencing now was her choice. She said, yes. No one had ever dared to resist Kingsley's orders, including her. Her promise made Kingsley silent for a long, long time. After that, the other end hung up, and Jean also put down her phone. She looked at the group of people in front of her and slowly lowered her head to say to George, "We can't leave anymore." George frowned. Miles was also very surprised. Jean said, "Kingsley has asked us to stay. I'm sorry to disappoint you." George raised his little face and looked at her without saying anything. "Miles, we have to stay in Southampton City for the time being," Jean said to Miles. Miles did not care. He was just carrying out a mission anyway. Chapter 309. Edward agrees to get married. He nodded, indicating that he did not mind. With that, Jean held George's hand and walked out of the waiting room. The group of people in black suits watched them leave the airport without stopping them. They all took a taxi, but Jean took George with her while Miles took a taxi back to his apartment. Since she was going to Fourth Master Swan's place, she thought it was best for Miles not to be there. Thus, she and George returned to the Swans again. Thinking about it, she found it pretty ridiculous. She had been scheming for so long, only to return with her tail between her legs. She held George's hand and walked into Bamboo Garden. When she walked in, she heard Knox's voice shouting, "Jean, that fickle and cold-blooded woman, is really not worthy of you." Knox was right, and that was why she could accept Knox's accusations so calmly. Then, she brazenly and shamelessly appeared at Fourth Master Swan's door again. As soon as she knocked on the door, he opened it. She said, "Fourth Master, do you want to get married?" Kingsley had told her to come back and marry Fourth Master Swan. In fact, on the way back, she had thought a lot about it and how she could get Fourth Master Swan to marry her. In the end, she figured it was better not to play tricks on someone like Fourth Master Swan. After all, she did not think she could trick him, and it was better to be straightforward and tell him her purpose. She saw the surprise in his eyes. From the second she saw him to her saying those words, it would be strange if he were not surprised. Therefore, she waited silently, waiting for Fourth Master Swan's reaction. 1 second. 2 seconds. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 10 minutes. Time passed. Just like that. However, he did not say anything in the end. Jean took a deep breath, intending to break the silence when the man in front of her suddenly closed the door. It was the most obvious rejection, yet Jean felt as though her heart was pierced by a needle. She pursed her lips. If it were her, she would not agree to it either. After all, she had humiliated him, and now she wanted to marry him? Who was she kidding? She quietly composed herself and thought about how she could complete Kingsley's order. To people like Kingsley, she could never dream to leave if she did not complete the mission. With that, she took a deep breath and turned around to leave. However, the room door suddenly opened again. Jean was stunned. She saw Fourth Master Swan again, standing high and mighty in front of her, and heard him say, "Miss Lawrence, have you been possessed?" Jean smiled brightly, but Edward stared at her coldly. "No," Jean answered seriously. "I just suddenly can't bear to leave you, Fourth Master." "Miss Lawrence, it's best if you're honest." Edward's eyes narrowed. Hence, it was still pretty hard to deceive Fourth Master Swan. She said, "I've thought it through and realized I can't just leave like this." Edward just looked straight at her as if checking to see whether she was lying or not. She continued, "I was once bullied so badly by the Lawrences. Now that I've finally returned, I want to take back everything that belongs to me. If I give up halfway through, I'll be unsatisfied. Aren't you terrified of the Sanders, Miss Lawrence?" Edward raised his eyebrows. "Didn't you say he could protect me? Do you believe me?" Edward sneered and thought, "When have you ever believed me?" "I do." Jean was certain. There was a subtle change in Edward's expression. He knew what she said was somewhat true, but at that moment, he was still stunned by her determination. He kept silent. "Fourth Master, let's make a deal," Jean said, which prompted Edward to look at her. "If you can guarantee my safety in Harkin, I will make sure the Sanders don't harass you." Jean was negotiating with him very seriously. "What do you think?" However, Edward did not respond. Jean continued, "Melody isn't the only one in the Sanders. Since they have taken a fancy to the Swans, they will definitely think of ways to get it. If one Melody dies, thousands and thousands more of Melodies will appear. You're rejecting the Sanders because you have someone in your heart, right? Once we get married, the Sanders should have no reason to marry one of the Sanders to you. After all, Harkin has a monogamous marriage system. No matter how dominant the Sanders is, they can't take it that far. You think it through very clearly. Since you've been using me since the beginning, why not continue using me? My request is very simple. All you need to do is ensure the safety of me and my son, George, in Harkin." Jean looked at Fourth Master Swan and said, "After all, this will be a marriage of convenience. If you want to back out, I definitely won't pester you." Chapter 310. Edward agrees to get married. Is that so? Edward raised his eyebrows. A marriage of convenience? In that case, what if you want to back out of the marriage, Miss Lawrence? Edward asked. If she backed out, he would still have to let her go, right? Jean bit her lips and said, "I won't back out." Something in Edward's eyes shifted. "You'll have the final say in this marriage, Fourth Master. If you want to get married or get a divorce, I'll follow whatever you say." Jean smiled and looked so obedient. Edward's tall body suddenly moved closer to Jean. Then, he lowered his head and stared at Jean. The two of them were very close to each other, so close that Jean could almost feel Fourth Master Swan's breathing. His breath on her face was so hot that it felt like an attack. She subconsciously gritted her teeth and did not dodge or even look away for a second. She looked very sincere. Fourth Master Swan lifted her chin, closing the distance between them even more. "When did you become so obedient?" Edward asked her with a pause between each word. She still could not deceive Fourth Master Swan. Kingsley's order to have her marry Fourth Master Swan was not easy at all. Fourth Master Swan liked her, but the man's rationality was terrifying. He would not abandon his principles for her sake. She said, "In that case, I'm sorry to have bothered you, Fourth Master." Jean pulled herself away from him, and her chin left his slender fingers. Fourth Master Swan's eyes moved slightly, but he did not stop her. With that, Jean turned around. She thought maybe she was too aggressive. After all, she had just plotted against him, and now she said she wanted to get married to him. Who in the world would be so foolish? However, as soon as she left, "Okay." Jean's body tensed up as Fourth Master Swan's voice sounded behind her. As if in a daze, wondering if she had heard wrongly, she turned her head to look at Fourth Master Swan. It was impossible to tell his emotions because his face was emotionless. Therefore, at that moment, she asked with some uncertainty, "Did you agree to our marriage?" When do you want to get married? He did not answer her directly and was already planning the next step. Jean unconsciously bit her lip. She had to admit that at that moment, her heart was beating wildly. Never did she think that Fourth Master Swan would be so forthcoming. She did not know why he would agree, but she told herself that assassins had no feelings. The last thing they should have were feelings holding them back. In fact, Kingsley had many assassins under him. Some of them really relied on seduction to complete one difficult mission after another, and after completing it, they would turn around and leave with no feelings attached. No matter what happened to the man who loved her with all his heart, the assassin would just treat him coldly. She, too, would become a person like that. She said, "You have the final say, Fourth Master. What kind of wedding do you want? You have the final say." Okay. Edward did not ask further. He knew very well that she would not have any expectations for the marriage because she had no feelings for him. Hence, he said, "Rest well, Miss Lawrence. I will inform you when the date is set." Okay. Jean nodded obediently. The next second, Fourth Master Swan closed the door. The way the two of them talked about marriage was like they were discussing business. It was fine as long as they finished talking. There was no need to put too many feelings into it. However, Jean still stood at Fourth Master Swan's door for a very, very long time. Only after a while did she turn around and leave to the room next door to get George. Then, she brought George downstairs. With the marriage confirmed, she did not want to stay here. Since she had to stay, she would have to go back to the Lawrences. There was still a pile of trash in the Lawrences that needed her to deal with. She had just gone downstairs when she saw Knox walking over imposingly. He asked fiercely, "You're leaving again?" Jean did not answer. "You didn't manage to seduce him?" Knox mocked. Jean did not want to answer that question either. "Jean, do you really think our family's Fourth Master Swan is so easy to seduce? Why would he allow you to play him again after you played him once? You've underestimated him," Knox said proudly. At that, Jean smiled. Knox continued, "From now on, stay away from Fourth Master Swan. To tell you the truth, I already have plans to introduce a girlfriend to him, and I have a lot of resources on hand. If he doesn't like this one, he can try the next one. If he doesn't like the next one, he can try another. If he doesn't like that one, he can move on. Anyway, I've made arrangements for his sex life," Knox went on and on. Chapter 311. Edward agrees to get married. Jean interrupted him and said, "I'm sorry to disappoint you, Knox." Knox frowned. He felt that Jean was very proud of herself. "Fourth Master and I are getting married soon." "Wow, what?" Knox looked at Jean. At that moment, he thought he must have heard wrongly. "You can keep those resources to yourself. From now on, you don't have to worry about the Fourth Master's sex life." Knox's eyes were bulging. He refused to believe it or, to be more precise, he could not accept it. He could not accept that his Fourth Master Swan was being played by Jean. Just as he was about to speak, Edward suddenly said from behind, "Knox, contact a wedding company for me." What kind of miraculous turn of events was that? Has the author know has Fourth Master Swan gone crazy? Knox turned his head and looked at Fourth Master Swan in a daze. By then, Jean had already left with George. When they walked out, the Fourth Master Swan's black car at the door stopped in front of her. The driver got down from the car respectfully and said to Jean, "Miss Lawrence, Fourth Master has told me to send you and the young master off." Jean's heart skipped a beat. She turned around to look at the driver with a smile. "Thank you." "No worries, Miss Lawrence. Please hop on." The chauffeur opened the car door for her. With that, Jean and George got into the car and left Bamboo Garden. Jean could not help but heave a sigh. She, too, did not know why she was sighing. It was probably because she wanted to relax her tense heart. Forget Knox finding it unbelievable, for even she could not accept how things had developed. "Mom." George, who was beside her, suddenly called out to her. Jean looked over at him. Are you going to marry Fourth Master Swan?" George asked in his childlike voice. Jean felt guilty. "I'm sorry, I know. I promised you I wouldn't be with Fourth Master Swan." George stared at her. Jean said, "I know you don't like Fourth Master Swan, but sometimes, I don't have a choice either. George, if you don't like living with Fourth Master Swan, I'll get Kingsley to bring you with him." "No need." George shook his head. "I want to stay with you." Deep down, Jean was a little touched. When she was at her worst, George's existence would be her greatest encouragement. She touched George's hair and said, "Actually, Fourth Master Swan and I are in a marriage of convenience. That means we're not married because we have feelings for each other, but because of benefits. So, one day, Fourth Master Swan and I will get a divorce. It seemed like Jean was assuring George that they would leave one day. George opened his small mouth, but the words got stuck in his throat. Then, he turned to look out of the car window. He did not want to tell his mother that when Fourth Master Swan carried him in the amusement park today before they entered the haunted house, he whispered in his ear, "Promise me 2 things. First, take care of yourself so that your mother doesn't have to worry about you. Second, take care of your mother for me so that I don't have to worry about her." Although George was very young, he understood what Fourth Master Swan said then. He understood that Fourth Master Swan was saying his goodbye. That was why when his mother picked him up and left the amusement park, he asked, "Where's Fourth Master?" What he wanted to tell his mother at that moment was that Fourth Master Swan would not stop them from leaving. However, he did not say it in the end. He always thought Fourth Master Swan would snatch his mother away, and that was why he would not give Fourth Master Swan a chance. When the car arrived at the Lawrence family's manor, Jean thanked the driver and then led George inside. She thought she would never show up in this place again, but she was back. It had been more than a week since the accident, but her sudden appearance stunned Alexander and Jennifer in the living room. Obviously, they did not expect her to come back. Alexander's face sank as he had been seething with anger at Jean's sudden absence from work for a week. If it were not for Fourth Master Swan giving him a call, he would not have endured it until now. Jean was really becoming more and more arrogant. She thought she could look down on others just because of her current ability. As such, he said coldly, "You're finally willing to come back, huh?" Jean had already expected Alexander to be behaving strangely. However, she did not want to deal with him right now. Alexander said, "So what? Now that you've seduced Fourth Master Swan, you think you're all grown up, huh? You don't even take me seriously anymore." Honestly, without Fourth Master Swan, he would not take her seriously either. If it were not for her mother, who had once stayed in the house, she would not have been so entangled with the family. Chapter 312. Edward agrees to get married. She said, "Dad, I'm a little tired, so I'll head to my room now." "Have you been staying at Fourth Master Swan's place for the past few days?" Alexander asked. Jean nodded in response. She really did not want to waste her time on Alexander. "What's your relationship with Fourth Master Swan now?" Alexander asked bluntly. Jean did not want to answer. She felt that although Fourth Master Swan had agreed to it, she was afraid he would suddenly go back on his word. It was not that she did not trust him, but after thinking it through, she felt that she had come with ill intentions. If he really had some sense, he would not have agreed to marry her so abruptly. "What? You can't say it." Alexander's face darkened. "I can't say it." Jean did not beat around the bush. Alexander sneered and looked at Jean in contempt. Jean did not need to think to know what Alexander thought of her. In Alexander's mind, she and Fourth Master Swan were just sleeping together. She did not explain herself, nor did she want to explain herself. In any case, she did not care about how Alexander saw her. With that, she held onto George's hand and left straight for upstairs. Alexander's expression was ugly, but he did not say anything more. Meanwhile, Jennifer stared at Jean's silhouette and purposely said, "I can't believe Jean would actually sell her body." Alexander sneered, "Otherwise, do you think she is where she is now by relying on herself?" "That's true. Jean has so many assets. It would be impossible for her to earn it all by herself even over 8 lifetimes. Who knows how many men she had to accompany to have her current achievements." Jennifer looked a little annoyed. Right now, everyone out there is talking about where Jean got her money. She has really dragged the Lawrence's name through the mind. Alexander's expression was a little grim. Jennifer knew best to fan the flames, so she said again, "Right now, for Jean to do better in life, she has gone to seduce Fourth Master Swan again. Although Fourth Master Swan has shown his fondness for Jean at all major events, I heard from Jasmine that Fourth Master Swan did this so that he had a reasonable reason to reject the Sanders. However, I don't understand why Fourth Master Swan would reject a perfectly fine princess of the Sanders." Alexander did not understand it at first either. That was until he had a few words with Eden, who told him that the Sanders had taken a fancy to the Swan's assets and wanted to use the marriage to get a piece of that cake. When he thought about it, he found it reasonable for the Sanders to be afraid of how powerful the Swans were becoming. Then, he instantly understood. Seeing Alexander did not speak, Jennifer continued. "Now that the Sanders' third princess has passed away unexpectedly, Jean probably knows she's useless. That is why she climbed into Fourth Master Swan's bed and won't let him go. Jean really knows no shame." Alexander cursed fiercely. "However, I do rather admire Jean." Jennifer appeared to be very sincere. Fourth Master Swan hasn't had a single woman by his side for so many years, Yet Jean got into his bed. It shows that Jean is quite capable. Now that I think about it, it's not surprising for Jean to have such a large amount of assets. If she could seduce Fourth Master Swan, other men shouldn't be a problem. She was certain that Jean had gotten all her money from men. What's there to be proud of by selling one's body? If not for the fact my father thinks highly of Jean now, I would have kicked her out of the house long ago. Alexander snickered. Forget it. Doesn't the old master think Jean is useful now? Jennifer advised. I think the old master knows his limits, but...
But what? Alexander's expression turned cold. But the old master thinks so highly of Jean, and since Joshua is so useless, I'm really afraid that the old master would make his decision and hand the Lawrence enterprise over to Jean.
In the end, didn't the Lawrences want someone to carry on the family name? In any case, even if the women in the Harkin are deemed unsuitable to assume that role, if there was no other choice, the daughter would have to bear that responsibility. More importantly, Jean now has a son, George, whose surname is also Lawrence. That was Jennifer's concern. She had finally found the right time, when Alexander was very dissatisfied with Jean, to say it, all because she wanted him to be on her side. When Alexander heard what Jennifer said, his expression turned ugly. Who can you blame? It's all Joshua's fault for not living up to expectations. Chapter 313. Edward agrees to get married. I know it's my fault that I didn't educate Joshua well, but Joshua is the Lawrence's only son. I can't just abandon him, can I? What's more, if the Lawrence enterprise really falls into Jean's hands, do you think we can still have a good life? With Jean's current attitude toward us, we would be kicked out of the family. She doesn't have the ability to do that yet. Alexander was furious. His tone was very heavy. Jennifer quickly softened her stance. I'm just worried, that's all. Please don't get angry. It's not good for your health. If you don't calm down, I won't say it next time, lest I make you unhappy. Don't worry. No matter how capable Jean is, it's impossible for her to obtain the Lawrence's assets. Alexander was very certain. However, Jennifer was still worried. After all, the Lawrence's assets were not in Alexander's possession but old Master Lawrence's. Moreover, Jean already had 10% of the Lawrence's shares. If that went on, who knew what would happen? Jean doesn't have the right to inherit the Lawrence's assets. After Alexander said those words, he immediately stood up and left. He did not seem to be in the mood to talk nonsense with Jennifer. Jennifer stared at Alexander's back. What did he mean by not having the right? No matter how smart he was, he could not understand it at that moment. However, at least now she knew how Alexander saw it. That way, she would be able to relax a little. The most important thing now was to make Jean lose her reputation again and get kicked out of the family. That woman was really not an easy one to deal with. At the Swans, in the bamboo garden, Knox talked for at least an hour. For an hour, he tried to persuade Edward to think twice before acting and kept insisting that Jean had ulterior motives until his mouth was dry from all the talking. However, that man remained indifferent as he stared at his phone screen. Knox took a look, only to see all kinds of wedding photos on the screen. The guy had already started, planning on taking wedding photos. No, he was already planning when he would get married. Then, he suddenly put down his phone. Startled, Knox asked, "Have you thought it through?" "I have." Edward stood up from the sofa. Knox stood up as well. "It's good that you have thought it through. If you have, don't bother with that woman, Jean. It's time I visit the old master." "Why?" Knox was still traumatized by old Master Swan. At the thought of the wound on his back, he began to feel the pain again. To tell him about the marriage between Jean and me. There was no hope. Fourth Master Swan was completely hopeless. One day, he would die at the hands of Jean. With that, Edward brought Knox with him and walked into Universe Garden. It was already nighttime, so the courtyard was very quiet. The first person Fourth Master Swan saw was Wade. Knox did not even look at his grandfather. When he recalled how he was beaten up a few days ago, he felt all sorts of emotions. Wade also ignored his grandson. He looked at Edward and asked, "What can I do for you, Fourth Master Swan?" "I'm looking for my father. He just had dinner and should be resting in the tea room." Edward nodded. He walked past Wade and entered the house. However, Knox did not follow him. He had a feeling that it was a war between father and son, and he did not want to be implicated as an innocent. Therefore, he just stood in the main hall with his grandfather. "Don't you feel guilty to see me?" Knox questioned. Wade glanced at his grandson. "You're lucky you didn't die. I'm not your biological grandson, am I?" "I picked you up," Wade said bluntly. Knox almost spat out a mouthful of blood. "So you do have some self-awareness to realize that you're not the eldest young master of the Winters." The old man was very evil. Knox would be dumb to believe him. By the way. Wade suddenly thought of something. The child bride that your father found for you. Don't talk about the child bride, okay? I said I don't like her. Knox was irritated. I didn't say you have to like her. I just want you to carry on the family line, Wade said straightforwardly. So I'm not F*C king worthy of love? Knox burst out. He was also very disrespectful to his grandfather. Wade laughed, and at that moment, he even glanced at Knox's crotch. Knox shuddered at his grandfather's laughter. What are you looking at? The child bride is 18 years old. Get the ceremony done as soon as possible and give birth to a child. It was rare for Wade to expose Knox, and he directly gave an order. I'll tell your parents about your marriage later. Chapter 314. Edward agrees to get married. Old Man Winter, resistance is futile. Wasn't I picked up? Why do I have to carry on the family line? Knox raged on. However, Wade ignored him and went straight inside, not giving Knox the chance to reject him. Knox was furious. D*MN it. He was not someone who would submit to his fate. The more they wanted him to marry Shelley, the more he would not. Even if they wanted him to marry someone, Shelley was not his type. If he had to carry on the family line, he had to marry a decent one. In the tea room, Edward appeared in front of Zachary. When it came to Old Master Swan, Edward still treated him with much respect, so he greeted the old man, Dad. What's the matter? Zachary was playing chess by himself at that moment, and he looked very relaxed. I'm getting married, he went straight to the point. He was just that straightforward. The chess in Zachary's hands paused for a moment before he put it down slowly. Without showing any emotion, he asked Edward, who's the other party? Jean. Do you think I'll agree? I'm not asking for your opinion, Edward Said. I'm just informing you. I've wasted all these years of effort on you, haven't I? Zachary's words were not harsh, but they could make people shudder. My life is yours, but my heart is not, Edward Said clearly. Is there no turning back? Zachary let go of the chess piece and looked at his son. No, Edward looked into his eyes. I have to marry her. What if I insist on not agreeing? As I said, my life is yours, and you can beat me to death. Edward enunciated each word clearly. Zachary was visibly displeased. Once he was angry, he could fill the house with a gloomy atmosphere. That was how powerful his presence was. Are you threatening me? I'm just expressing my determination. Edward was still respectful. Zachary looked at Edward coldly. He looked at the son he had raised and the resistance he was putting up against him at that moment. Then, his face darkened. Wade. Yes? Wade walked in from outside. Send him to the confinement room. Wade paused for a moment, and Zachary gave him a look. With no other choice, Wade walked toward Edward respectfully. Please, Fourth Master Swan. With that, Edward turned around and followed Wade out. It was the confinement room again, but the door of the confinement room seemed to have changed. After all, Finn had smashed the previous one. As he walked in, there was nothing inside but a gloomy and cold feeling. After Edward entered, he immediately knelt on the ground as if he was used to it. That was the result when he did not do as he was pleased. He watched as Wade walked up to him with the whip in his hand. Wade sighed. Fourth Master Swan, why do you have to go against your father? I'm not going against him, Edward Said. I just want a life of my own. I knew you weren't destined to have one from the moment you were born. That's why I want to fight for myself. Wade still wanted to say something but chose not to in the end. Once Fourth Master Swan decided on something, nothing could make him change his decision. Inside the confinement room, only the sound of whipping could be heard, and it went on for almost the entire night.
The next morning, the door of the confinement room was pushed open.
Knox naturally stayed in Universe Garden the whole night. He knew it would end like that, but Fourth Master Swan still had to do it his way. What kind of magic power did Jean, the eldest young lady Lawrence, have? As soon as the door opened, Zachary stepped in. In the confinement room, Edward was kneeling with his back straight. Even though his back was wounded from being whipped, he remained upright.
Knox was used to the scene, so when he saw Edward's bloody back, he could remain calm.
Have you thought it through? Zachary asked Edward. I have thought it through very clearly, Edward Said. I want to marry Jean. Knox's heart trembled. To be honest, he was still afraid of Old Master Swan. Even though he was held hostage the last time, he was still afraid after he calmed down. After all, he had grown up under his cruelty since he was young, so it was hard not to be afraid. However, Knox was considered to be treated quite all right, for Old Master Swan was the cruelest to his own son, Fourth Master Swan.
He felt it was not easy for Fourth Master Swan to have grown up without going crazy. At those thoughts, Knox trembled with fear. In the somewhat silent isolation room, Zachary suddenly said, "Bring Jean to see me."
Edward's eyes moved, and he looked straight at Zachary. "Since you want to marry her, I have to see who she is." Edward pursed her thin lips. On the other hand, Knox's eyeballs almost fell out. Old Master Swan had agreed, and so easily at that, which did not make sense. All he did was give Fourth Master Swan a few whips, albeit still quite bad, but he was not half dead. To Old Master Swan, that was not considered a punishment. Yet, he had agreed just like that. Knox could not keep up with the plot anymore. He just watched Old Master Swan leave after that speech and then turned around to see Fourth Master Swan standing up from the ground. Knox quickly went up to support him. "Are you really going to marry Jean?" Knox asked as he helped Edward to walk. It was really unbelievable. How could someone, who had never been in a relationship, get married just like that? It made him feel very embarrassed. He had been through hundreds of relationships and had never thought about starting a family. Edward did not answer Knox, and there was no need for Knox to continue asking because Knox knew from the smile on Edward's face. In this lifetime, Fourth Master Swan would never be able to escape from Jean's grasp. The marriage was decided. Chapter 315. Set a date for the wedding. In Bamboo Garden, Knox helped Edward to his bed. At that moment, Finn was already waiting in Bamboo Garden. Last night, Knox dialed Finn's number and told him to come to Bamboo Garden early in the morning as he had expected such an outcome. Finn asked while treating the wound on Edward's back, "What happened? Why was he whipped again?" The fourth master seemed to be injured a little too frequently these days. Knox laughed sinisterly and did not reply. On the contrary, Edward, who had always been quiet, said, "Finn, I'm getting married." His tone sounded indifferent, but if one were to look carefully, one could hear the joy in his voice. Finn's hand that was treating the wound paused for a moment. Then, he turned to look at Knox beside him as if to confirm whether it was true. He found that it was too sudden, so much that he could not accept it. It was just like that year when he suddenly announced that he was getting married, and they, too, found it hard to believe. With Jean. Feeling Finn's gaze on him, Knox added, and when he said the word Jean, he gritted his teeth. Finn was surprised, but he also understood. He reacted much calmer than Knox and accepted it in an instant. He said, "Congratulations." The man lying on the bed raised his head and smiled. Once Finn dressed and bandaged Edward's back, he packed up his medical kit and told Edward some things to take note of. Then, he could not help but ask, "When are you getting married?" Edward replied, "In a few days." "Why the hurry? Rest well and don't get yourself hurt again. You'll be able to recover within a week." Finn was serious. "It won't affect your sex life." Edward nodded. "I'll head off now. I have surgery to attend to this afternoon." With that, Finn got up. Knox glanced at Finn's back as he left, and when he turned around, he saw that Edward had already gotten up from the bed. He said in a strange tone, "Didn't Finn say not to get up? Aren't you afraid that you won't be able to have sex on your wedding night?" "Get Teddy over for me." Edward ignored Knox, who rolled his eyes. Forget it. In any case, in this life, Fourth Master Swan had fallen into Jean's hands. Jean left the house with George, who would go to school while she went to work at Lawrence Enterprise. Everything seemed to have returned to square one. Who would have thought that just yesterday, for a split second, everything here would have become a thing of the past? She had just been sent to the company when her phone rang. She took a glance at the incoming call and composed herself before saying, "Fourth Master, where are you?" "At work." The corners of Jean's mouth curled into a smile. "Fourth Master, is there something you need?" "My father wants to see you." Her heart skipped a beat. "I'll pick you up from work tonight." "Okay." When the other side hung up the phone, Jean held the phone in her hand in a daze. Miles looked at her. "Are you sure you want to marry Fourth Master Swan? Or what?" Jean snapped back to her senses and regained her composure. "Does Mr. Thorne really wants you to marry him?" Ming Lang found it somewhat unbelievable. "Have you ever seen Kingsley joke around?" Miles nodded and then sighed. Jean knew what he was sighing about. However, she smiled and said, "I'm leaving." "Okay." Jean got out of the car and walked straight into Lawrence Enterprise. She had not come to work for more than a week, so everyone was a little surprised to see her. As she walked straight into her office, Amy hurriedly followed her in. "Director Lawrence, I thought you weren't coming to work." "I ran into something, so I took a week off." "Did anything big happen this week?" Jean asked as she turned on her computer. "The logistics warehouse project is in full swing, and we're doing pilot marketing to some areas. The effect isn't obvious at the moment, but it is going in a good direction, Amy reported respectfully. In the company, the transitioning of the senior management role hasn't been smooth. Although many from the senior management don't say it, the comments have not been good, which has led to a lot of work being held back. Didn't the executive general manager do anything about it? Jean raised her eyebrows. No, I don't think he asked much, so some work has been delayed. Okay, I got it. Jean nodded. Director Lawrence, black coffee without sugar? Thank you. With that, Amy turned to leave. Call Forrest over for me. Sure. Forrest pushed the door open and entered. Then, he sat in front of Jean and could not help but say, I thought you wouldn't come to work. After all, she had disappeared for a week without saying anything. Chapter 316. Set a date for the wedding. She was not supposed to come, but she did not explain further. I heard from Amy the transitioning of the senior management role isn't going well. Everyone in the senior management is with power, and in Lawrence Enterprise, they each have seniority and status. Even if the Human Resources Department has been taking the lead in this matter, without a strong leader to push it forward, as long as the senior management doesn't do their job, the Human Resources Department can't make the transition go smoothly. That is to say, President Lawrence didn't care about it at all. Jean knew very well. Indeed, he didn't. Moreover, President Lawrence's attitude when doing things is that as long as he has given the orders, he'll wait for the results. He will not waste any more time and handle things personally unless he encounters a problem. If he encounters a problem, his ability to solve the problem would also be very worrying, Forrest said bluntly. Jean did not need to put in any good words for Alexander because that was the truth.
She said, okay, I got it. I'll think of a way to solve this matter. By the way, have you sorted out the senior management's previous situation? It's here. Knowing that Director Lawrence would want it, he already had it prepared.
Jean took it and looked at it seriously. Then, she said, gather the project team members to have a meeting to discuss the sales pilot of the logistics warehouse. Okay. Jean put down the information and went to the meeting room with Forrest. In the meeting room, the project team members were all present. Jean did not waste any more time and went straight to the point. I need 3 sets of data. First, how many users do we have for the pilot marketing, and what is the success rate of the sales?
Second, how many users do we have to contact for promotions, and what is the success rate of the sales? Third, I need a questionnaire. The questionnaire should include whether they like the interface of the e-commerce platform, whether it's user-friendly, whether the e-commerce activities are attractive, and what suggestions they have for the e-commerce platform. Forrest, make the necessary arrangements.
Yes, Forrest was extremely respectful. Who is currently liaising with Muck Group? Jean asked. I am, Hans quickly replied. Once the data is out, meet with the person in charge tomorrow morning to discuss the optimization of the progress of the pilot project. Let me know when you've confirmed the time. Yes. Right. Who is the person in charge of the pilot project this time? Jean raised her eyebrows. It's Deputy Director Lawrence. Okay, I got it. Jean nodded. Everyone dismissed. After that, she left immediately. The people in the meeting room could not help but lament. I don't know why, but I have a feeling that with Director Lawrence around, our work efficiency will be much higher. That's true. She can get to the point and explain it clearly to us every time. On the other hand, Deputy Director Lawrence doesn't know what he wants and still has to rely on us to figure it out. I hope Director Lawrence will always lead us. Jean did not return directly to her office. Instead, she knocked on Joshua's door. Joshua was in the middle of a game, so when he heard the knocking on the door, he ignored it. Jean did not want to waste more time and immediately pushed open the door. Joshua was a little unhappy, but the moment he turned his head and saw Jean, the words got stuck in his throat. Even so, he ignored Jean and continued to play his game.
Jean did not react to Joshua's lack of work etiquette. She simply went up to Joshua and said indifferently, "You don't need to be involved in the pilot marketing of the e-commerce platform anymore."
Joshua's expression changed instantly, and he roared at Jean, "Why?" "Because my position is higher than yours. I'm not discussing it with you but arranging it for you." "Jean, don't think you're so great just because you have some money." Joshua was so angry that he quit his game and stood up angrily from his seat. "I'm just informing you." "Jean." By then, Jean had already walked out. The moment she walked out, she said to Joshua's secretary, "Give Amy all the information on the e-commerce platform project." Joshua's secretary was put in an awkward situation. She turned her head to look at Deputy Director Lawrence in the office. Deputy Director Lawrence was so angry that he could kill someone, while on the other hand, Director Lawrence was so nonchalant that she could not refuse. The secretary braced herself and handed the things to Amy. When Jean returned to the office, she devoted herself to her work. Kingsley said the most valuable thing about her was that she was more serious than anyone else when doing something. However, this was not valuable, she was forced to do it. The environment made people, and she just went with the flow. At 5:30 p.m., Jean's phone rang. Chapter 317. Set a date for the wedding. Jean took a look and paused when she saw the string of Arabic numbers. She did not save Fourth Master Swan's name, but she knew that was his number. She took a deep breath, and only then did she recall that Fourth Master Swan said he would take her to see his father tonight. However, she really did not want to go. She picked up the call. Fourth Master. Are you off work? The man on the other end of the phone asked. Jean looked at her work and said, Yes, I'm downstairs. I'll be right down. Jean put down the phone. She was halfway through writing the proposal and some planning. However, she saved all the files, turned off the computer, and then left work. Amy was surprised to see Director Lawrence leaving work so early. She saw that Director Lawrence had a lot of work to do, and based on her understanding of Director Lawrence, she would only leave after she had dealt with all her work. Moreover, was there not a collaboration with Muck Group at 10 a.m. tomorrow? She had always been fully prepared for negotiations. Therefore, Jean thought she would visit Old Master Swan and spend time with Fourth Master Swan before coming back to work overtime. With that thought in mind, she arrived at the lobby of Lawrence Enterprises building. At that moment, it was just time to get off work, and there were some people at the door. Among the crowd, Fourth Master Swan's ostentatious appearance there really made him stand out. Jean gritted her teeth and went over, where Fourth Master Swan handed Jean the bouquet of roses in his hand. Thank you. Jean smiled. The next second, someone grabbed her hand and pulled her into the car. It was a very simple action, but it made the onlookers gasp in surprise. They found Fourth Master Swan's every move, every frown, and smile too handsome. There was an indescribable charm to him. In the car, Jean's hand was held tightly in Fourth Master Swan's palm. At the same time, he stared at her without blinking, with his other hand still propped on the car window. No matter how calm Jean was, she was also baffled by the gaze. She said, Fourth Master, is there something on my face? No, if not, why was he looking at her like that? You look good. Speechless, she thought, stop flirting. Jean turned her face to the side and looked out the car window. Even from her side profile, her face was visibly red. The car drove steadily into the Swan's courtyard and into Universe Garden. In fact, Jean had been here 7 years ago. She had already forgotten about it, but now the memory resurfaced in her mind again. When the car arrived, Edward personally opened the car door for Jean and led her into the house with their hands held. Jean moved her hand, feeling that it was a little weird. However, Edward did not seem to notice anything as he continued to hold her hand and walk intimately into the main hall. At that moment, in the main hall, Old Master Swan was sitting in the middle seat, looking as if he was waiting for them. Wade was standing beside him. The two of them just watched as Edward and Jean showed up, holding hands. There was no expression on their faces. Edward Said, Dad, Uncle Wade. That was when Jean began to feel awkward. What should she call him? Would it be too informal to call him as Edward did? Would it be inappropriate to call him by his seniority? Just like that, there was silence for a few seconds. Jean's palms were sweating. Before she really established a relationship with the Fourth Master, it seemed more appropriate to call him by his seniority. Hence, she smiled and said, Grandpa Swan. Grandpa Wade. Edward pursed his lips and said in a serious tone, call him uncle. Could he not ruin the situation at a time like that? She was embarrassed enough. It's all right. At that moment, Old Master Swan opened his mouth and said, it's just a form of address. You can change it slowly in the future. You can change it slowly in the future. Jean was moved as she never expected that Old Master Swan would give her an out. However, Old Master Swan did not say much either. Wade, get the servants to serve dinner. Yes. With that, Wade left. After a while, he respectfully invited them to the table to eat. On the huge antique dining table, Old Master Swan still sat in the most conspicuous position. Wade was not a servant, so he naturally sat next to Zachary. In the meantime, Edward sat on the other side of Zachary while Jean sat with Edward. The dining table was so very quiet that Jean felt like the air had frozen. I heard the two of you are getting married, Zachary suddenly said. That's right, Edward answered respectfully. Have you chosen a date? The 16th of this month. Zachary had to think for a few seconds.
Then, Wade said respectfully beside him, "It's this Saturday. There are still 4 more days."
Chapter 318. Set a date for the wedding. Zachary then glanced at Edward, and Jean also did the same. Was that a joke? From saying yes to the wedding yesterday to the wedding day only took 4 days. Could 4 days be enough to prepare for a wedding? On second thought, maybe it would be a simple wedding, so she accepted it. In any case, Fourth Master Swan had the final say. "Have you thought about the wedding gift?" Zachary asked Edward. It seemed that he had accepted it too. "I have thought about it," Edward replied. "I will transfer all the original shares of Swan Enterprise to Jean." Stunned, Jean turned her head to look at Edward. Zachary also looked at him in the same way. Edward sighed, "Not much, only 8%. According to Swan Enterprise's current assets, which were worth 100 billion yuan, 8% were worth just over 10 billion yuan. Jean pursed her lips. "It's not much. Compared to Ms. Lawrence's assets, it's just a small amount." Zachary nodded. Could she say that the money in her account was not hers? In her head, she was still trying to figure out how much money she had to prepare for a dowry for herself, and whether she could afford the wedding gift. "Wade," Zachary called out to the person beside him. Jean was still in a daze when she saw Wade handing Zachary a box, which looked like an old jewelry box. He took it out and handed it to Edward. "This is a small token of my appreciation." Edward froze for a moment before raising his head to look at his father. Jean did not know why Fourth Master Swan suddenly fell silent, but she could tell that the gift was very valuable. Then, she saw Edward receive it silently. "Thank you, Dad." Zachary nodded and did not say anything more. Edward placed the box beside her and did not give it to Jean or take it out for her to see what it was. In any case, Jean thought that the gift was not a simple one.
After dinner, Edward left the table with Jean. Jean did not expect that dinner with Old Master Swans would be so easy. She had always thought she would be made difficult or something. She even made preparations to face death calmly. However, everything was peaceful, and nothing happened.
It was just a simple meeting with a parent. Just as the two of them were about to leave, Old Master Swan suddenly said, "Ms. Lawrence, come with me to the tea room." Edward tightened his grip on Jean's hand. "Marriage is your own matter, and I won't interfere. I just want to have a simple chat with Ms. Lawrence." Zachary could see through his son's thoughts at a glance. However, Edward did not let go of Jean. On the contrary, Jean was very calm, and she called out to him, "Fourth Master." It was as if she was telling him to let go. Edward kept silent for a few seconds before letting go of her. Just like that, Jean followed Old Master Swan into the tea room.
To be honest, it was better to talk things out so that she would not have to guess what those people were thinking. She sat opposite Old Master Swan while Old Master Swan took a sip of tea and said, "I didn't think you would still come back."
Jean pursed her lips, not knowing what to say. That year, she actually came to look for Fourth Master Swan. It was not the night she slept with him, but it was when Alexander had beaten her up so badly that she was sent to the hospital. After she came out of the hospital, she endured all the injuries on her body and went to look for Fourth Master Swan at the Swan's residence. She knew Fourth Master Swan would not take the initiative to look for her, but he was her last hope, her only hope. At that time, she really needed someone she could rely on to help her recuperate and take revenge. When she showed up at the Swans, she did not see Fourth Master Swan. Instead, she saw Old Master Swan. Old Master Swan brought her into Universe Garden, and if she remembered correctly, it was the same house. At that time, he told her bluntly, "Jean, you're not good enough for my son." She was 18 years old that year. At 18 years old, it was her first time facing a person alone. In her eyes, he was an unapproachable big shot. Deep down, she was scared, but she mustered up her courage and said to Old Master Swan, "I know, but I just need Fourth Master Swan's help." "He won't help you," he said bluntly and indifferently. "We've slept together." "That doesn't mean anything," Old Master Swan said cruelly. "It only means that you're frivolous." Jean bit her lip. At that moment, she was very embarrassed to be told that.
"I'll give you a sum of money as a reward for sleeping with you." Old Master Swan tried to send her away by offering her money.
Back then, Jean had never been short of money before. Chapter 319. Set a date for the wedding. Therefore, she had no concept of money. If she knew she would be sent abroad, and if she knew she would be so miserable, perhaps she would not have refused. Then, she would have been dismissed by Old Master Swan in a few sentences. The sentence she remembered the most was, "Edward is also a swan, and he will help the swans. Don't embarrass yourself." That was what Old Master Swan told Jean when he kicked her out of the family. After that, she gave up. She gave up the struggle. She gave up on making meaningless struggles. She admitted that she was too weak to fight against anyone. Hence, when the Lawrences gave her a plane ticket to leave Southampton City, she left. From then on, she buried what happened with Fourth Master Swan in her memories. She even remembered a lot of things, but not that she slept with Fourth Master Swan.
No matter what, Eden cheated on her, she was maliciously slandered by the media, and she even resisted like crazy because she was unwilling to accept it. However, seducing Fourth Master Swan was her initiative, and she felt stupid for doing so. When she returned to the country 7 years later, she did not think she and Fourth Master Swan would cross paths again.
Whether it was the pride in her or Kingsley's instruction, all she wanted was to keep a distance from Fourth Master Swan. However, she was about to get married now. She looked at Old Master Swan, and when she saw his expressionless face, she was speechless. In any case, in everyone's eyes, she was seducing Fourth Master Swan, and she did not want to explain herself anymore. For a moment, the room was pin-drop silent. Suddenly, Zachary said, "I don't want Edward to know about what happened 7 years ago. Ms. Lawrence, you should know what I mean." Of course, she understood. She was not as thoughtless as to destroy the father and son relationship. "Today is my first time seeing you here," Jean expressed her stance. Zachary nodded as he, too, knew that Jean was a sensible person. Then, he said, "It's better to call me Uncle." Jean was stunned, but eventually, she said, "Uncle Zachary." "Yes," Zachary replied. "It's getting late. You should head back and get some rest." Jean turned around. "Edward likes you very much. Don't let him down." Behind her, Old Master Swan's deep and heavy voice sounded. Jean hummed in response when in reality, she did not know. She did not know what would happen in the end. With that, Jean walked out of the tea room. Edward was waiting for her in the main room, so she walked straight toward Edward and smiled. "Let's go." Edward's eyes moved a little as if he was sizing her up. He probably wanted to know what Old Master Swan said to her. Nevertheless, she took the initiative to hold Fourth Master Swan's hand and pulled him away. The two of them walked out of Universe Garden, which was about a 10-minute walk to Bamboo Garden. The two walked hand in hand in the Swans' huge garden. The first time Jean came to the Swans, she felt that the Swans was too overbearing. When she was dating Eden back then, she thought if she were to live in a place like that in the future, she would probably get lost.
Now, she was really going to move in. "What did my dad say to you?" Edward suddenly asked.
Jean smiled. "Do you want to know?" "Yes. Actually, he didn't say much." Edward's eyes narrowed. "He wants me to treat you better."
Edward did not believe it. Jean said, "Your dad said that you like me very much and told me not to let you down."
Edward began to feel emotional. "I used to think that Old Master Swan was invincible, that he's the kind of person who doesn't recognize his own kin, and that his existence is beyond mortals. But today, I suddenly feel that he is just an ordinary father who treats you pretty well." Edward seemed to have hummed in agreement, but he did not say anything else. Jean did not want to be so emotional. She changed the topic. "I might not be able to pay for such an expensive dowry." Edward was stunned. He did not expect Jean to change the topic so quickly. Jean said, "Most of my money is actually from Kingsley, and what's mine is probably only a fraction of that." A fraction of that was only a few billion. Even if she went bankrupt, it would not be able to match the wedding gifts that Fourth Master Swan gave her. "Do you think I want your money?" Edward raised his eyebrows. "I don't need money. George is enough," Edward suddenly said. Jean was stunned. "I'm very happy with your son," Edward said straightforwardly. "So, I don't need anything else. Just bring George with you when you marry me." "Fourth Master, actually." Jean wanted to say something but hesitated. Edward waited for her next words. "It's better not to be too confident." Edward chucked and did not care too much about it.
Chapter 320. Set a date for the wedding. "Although George is 6 years old, he has little to do with you," Jean said straightforwardly. "Whether it has anything to do with me or not, I know very well."
Jean did not know what else to say. "Ms. Lawrence, don't worry." Thus, she could not fool Fourth Master Swan. When the two of them were almost at the door to Bamboo Garden, Jean said, "Fourth Master, I still have some work matters to take care of, so I won't go in with you. I'll drive you there." Jean thought, "If you want to drive me there, go ahead." With that, Jean sat in Fourth Master Swan's luxurious car. The two of them did not talk much. Jean sometimes did not know what to say to Fourth Master Swan, while Fourth Master Swan usually found it hard to be the first to speak.
Fortunately, the car arrived at Lawrence Enterprises building very quickly.
Jean got out of the car and was about to thank Fourth Master Swan when she saw that Fourth Master Swan had already gotten out of the car. Jean was stunned. The next second, Fourth Master Swan held her hand and led her straight into the Lawrence Enterprises hall. Jean pursed her lips. Just like that, she followed Fourth Master Swan, and they both walked into the elevator. Which floor? Edward asked while placing his slender finger on the elevator button. Jean came back to her senses. 13th floor. Edward pressed the number 13.
Jean was on the verge of breaking down. She really found Fourth Master Swan very difficult to grasp.
It was late at night. Did she really have to work overtime with him? She did not react and tried her best to remain calm as Fourth Master Swan led her out of the elevator. Then, the two of them walked into her office. I might be a little late, Fourth Master. You don't have to worry about me. Edward interrupted her. Jean pursed her lips, thinking that he was really not easy to deal with.
She said, Fourth Master, you can sit wherever you like while I get my work done. Edward nodded.
Then, he sat on the sofa at the side, leaned back, and took out his phone quietly.
Jean glanced at him. His presence made her feel very uncomfortable.
However, seeing that the guy had no intention of leaving and that she had an appointment with Muck Group tomorrow to discuss the project's progress, she could only force herself to bite the bullet and throw herself into her work. The office was very quiet. Just then, someone gently knocked on the door of her office. Amy had gone out for supper and then came back to work overtime. She knew Director Lawrence's way of working and figured the latter would come back to work at night. Hence, Amy came back after her meal, thinking she would wait for Director Lawrence when she saw the light in Director Lawrence's office was on. At that, she quickly made a cup of coffee and went in. The moment she entered, she froze. The handsome man sitting on the sofa was Fourth Master Swan. Was he really the legendary Fourth Master Swan? It was just too handsome. She did not even blink as she stared at him sitting on the sofa and so lazily at that. However, there was something about him that she could not take her eyes off him. Amy. Something flashed in Jean's eyes, and her tone sounded off. Amy quickly came back to her senses. Oh no, she was too engrossed in looking at the handsome guy just now. The point was, the handsome guy in front of her was her boss's lover? More importantly, Director Lawrence usually would not lose her temper with her, but the former was obviously angry at her now. Oh no, she was done for. She quickly put the coffee in front of Director Lawrence and stood in front of her awkwardly. Fourth Master, would you like some coffee? Jean looked at Fourth Master Swan, who was sitting on the sofa. Don't worry about me. Fourth Master Swan's eyes had been on his phone the entire time. Just who was he talking to now? His slender fingers were jumping on the screen. You can go out, Jean ordered. Yes. Amy quickly left. In the office, Jean drank the coffee while taking a break to relax her mind. Then, her eyes fell on Fourth Master Swan. Just now, Amy. It was not Amy's fault but Master Yan's. He was too famous. I'm not interested in any woman other than you, Ms. Lawrence, the man, who was on his phone, suddenly said. Jean quickly averted her gaze. Did he have a third eye? Jean pretended as if nothing happened and continued to drink her coffee. Ms. Lawrence, you don't need to be jealous. Edward put down her phone and looked at him. Jealous? How could he tell that she was jealous? How arrogant of him. Jean ignored him. She drank her coffee and focused her attention on her computer screen. While looking at her half-written proposal, she was thinking about what she should write next. At that moment, her body suddenly tensed up as she saw Fourth Master Swan walk up to her and take the remaining half cup of coffee from her hand.
Chapter 321. Set a date for the wedding. He saw her lipstick stain on the rim of the cup where she had just drunk it, but he still drank the rest of it.
She thought he did not want coffee. Do you like such bitter coffee, Ms. Lawrence? After drinking it, a certain someone asked. It keeps me awake. It's too bitter. It was just to keep her awake. She was about to speak when a certain someone's face suddenly drew closer. The next second, Jean could feel her heart beating rapidly as Fourth Master Swan landed an unexpected kiss on her lips. The taste of coffee filled her lips and teeth. However, at that moment, she felt that it was unusually delicious. He remained there for a long time before parting with her soft lips. Then, he said, this way, it won't be bitter. She was speechless, but in her head, she thought, get lost, pervert. Fourth Master Swan put down the coffee cup and stood up straight. You can continue working. After that, he left casually and sat back on the sofa, where he picked up his phone to look at it as if nothing had happened just now. He looked as if he would not disturb her from working. However, Jean pursed her lips, on which she could still feel that strong sensation. Next time, she definitely would not allow Fourth Master Swan to accompany her to work overtime. She tried her best to get her head in her work. What she thought would take at most 2 hours took her more time to complete because of Fourth Master Swan. It took more than 4 hours, and when she looked at the time, it was already past 12 a.m. She saved her documents and shut down her computer. The moment she looked to the side, she saw the man leaning against the sofa, asleep with his eyes closed. Although it was pretty late at night, it was not so late that he was too tired to support himself. However, she still made her movements lighter as she walked over to him. She had always known that he was too perfect, but every time she looked at him carefully, she would be attracted to him again. Hence, it really was not Amy's fault. Anyone would make a mistake with a man like that in front of them. Her eyes then fell on Fourth Master Swan's lips. Apparently, people with thin lips were fickle, but was that true? When she kissed him just now, she felt the deepest love in the world, and it even made her a little infatuated. She took a deep breath and turned around when someone grabbed hold of her arm. Jean was shocked. Was the guy not asleep? Where are you going, Ms. Lawrence? She thought, to calm down. However, she turned around with a smile and said, I saw you sleeping soundly, so I didn't want to disturb you. I thought I'd let you sleep a little longer. Are you done with your work? Edward asked. I just did. I'm sorry for making you wait, Fourth Master. Let's go. Edward stood up from the sofa, held her hand, and did not let go. Just like that, Edward pulled Jean out of the office and into the elevator. Amy's office was right outside Jean's, so she watched with her mouth agape as Director Lawrence was taken away. She had always thought Director Lawrence was the strong independent type of woman. Standing at 180 centimeters, Director Lawrence was more dominant than anyone else in the room. However, Amy was absolutely sure that at that moment, in front of Fourth Master Swan, Director Lawrence looked petite, protected, and could be bullied. She was talking about, in bed. Jean sat in Fourth Master Swan's car again. The car drove on the streets of Southampton City. As it was very late at night, very few cars were around, and the entire road was so weirdly quiet. Jean felt that there was something off about the streets tonight. It was not that she had never gotten off work so late in the past. However, she had a feeling that some places were different from usual, but she could not pinpoint what it was at the moment. She just looked at the streets, staring out the window. Then, she looked at the night sky of Southampton City. That was right. Why was it so dark? The night sky of Southampton City was always bright with stars and lights. At that moment, not only was the city quiet but very few lights were lit too. If one were to look carefully, one would realize that the street lights on both sides of the street had been switched off. Was there a power outage in the entire city? How was that possible? Now that technology was so advanced, a normal electrical accident would not cause a power outage in the entire city. Suddenly, her eyes stopped on a huge electronic screen flashing with a blinding light. There were pink words on the white screen. Jean, marry me. At the same time, a magnetic voice sounded, and along with it, a large heart bloomed on the screen. Jean was stunned for a long time, and her heart was racing. She turned her head to look at Fourth Master Swan. Fourth Master Swan was not on the screen, but she was very familiar with Fourth Master Swan's voice. Moreover, it was obviously a proposal. Other than him, there was no one else. She just kept looking at him without saying a word. Her heart was beating so fast that she could not say a single word. Monica did it for Finn before. Fourth Master Swan's voice was very low. However, Jean just listened to him. At that time, even Finn, who was so pure and innocent, was moved. So, I thought you'd like it. It was not that she did not like it, but, she was just afraid she would let him down. You don't like it? Having not gotten an answer from Jean, Edward asked. Fourth Master. Jean's expression suddenly turned serious. Edward raised his eyebrows. Aren't you afraid that this would all be a waste? Jean asked. What he had done for her had all gone to waste. Edward seemed to smile. He understood what she meant. Did she not mean that she might not appreciate what he had done? But, Jean suddenly got up from her seat and moved closer to Fourth Master Swan. Edward's eyes moved slightly. I will try my best to make it, not a waste, Fourth Master. After that, she hugged Fourth Master Swan's neck and kissed him deeply. The kiss was a response to his deep love for her. Chapter 322. The Wedding. Announcing it to the world. The big screen of Fourth Master Swan proposing to Jean lasted a whole day and night. The last time such a scene happened was 7 years ago when Monica was courting Finn, and the entire Southampton city was in an uproar. Just as everyone was still discussing whether Jean would marry Fourth Master, the news media had already announced that Fourth Master Swan and Jean's wedding would be on the 16th of that month, which was 3 days later. The viral news spread like wildfire across Harkin. Previously, there had been news of Fourth Master Swan and Jean having an affair, but nobody thought it was real. Even though they knew that the media would not dare to spread rumors about Fourth Master Swan, it was still unbelievable, and they thought it was probably just hype. Yet now, they were about to get married. In that case, they had to believe that Fourth Master Swan was really having an affair with Jean. Did the rumors not say that Fourth Master Swan was cold and abstinent and that he was not interested in women? As expected, the rumors could not be believed. The viral news spread all over Harkin. When Monica saw the news, she was also shocked to her core. The memory of Jean firmly telling her that she would never be with Fourth Master Swan was still fresh in her mind. Could it be that Jean really was moved? Jeannie was so moved with Fourth Master Swan saving her that, however, was it not too frivolous to get married as soon as they said they wanted to? More importantly, they were getting married right away. F***ck. Jean even lied to her and said that she did not like him. If she did not like him, would she get married to him right away? Monica roared on the phone, questioning Jean about her dishonesty. Jean could only bite the bullet and accept Monica's accusations. To be honest, she did not expect it to be so soon either. She thought it would be at least 3 to 5 months later, yet now, it was in 3 days. When she saw the wedding date announcement, she remained silent for a long time, still shocked that she was really going to marry Fourth Master Swan. After all, Fourth Master Swan, although they did have sex 7 years ago, she still felt he was out of her reach. Jean! Monica roared on the other end of the phone. Jean came back to her senses. It was not her fault for being absent-minded. It was Monica who kept going on and on. Her ears were getting calluses from talking. Aren't you going to comfort my hurt little heart? You made me worry about you for so long. Monica was unhappy. Jean smiled. How do you want me to comfort you? I want to be a bridesmaid. Monica enunciated each word clearly. Jean almost choked on her saliva. Aren't you married? According to Harkin's traditions, a married woman could not be a bridesmaid. Of course, she was not one to follow traditions, but she was afraid that the Swans would not be able to accept it. What if it bothers them? I don't care. I want to be your bridesmaid. Back then, we agreed that no matter who gets married, we'll be each other's bridesmaids. You weren't here when I got married, so can't I come when you get married? Monica stood her ground. Jean was actually touched. When they were young, the two of them had dreams of getting married, so they agreed to be each other's bridesmaids and be with each other when they got married. However, she was still under Kingsley's command when Monica got married. She was trained like crazy and could not get away at all. Thinking about it now, she felt very sorry for Monica. I'll ask the Fourth Master. Jean planned to fight for Monica to be her bridesmaid. However, getting married was a matter between two people. If the Swans did not agree, she would have to let Monica down again. Tell Fourth Master Swan that if he doesn't agree, I'll sue him for plagiarism, Monica said fiercely. Ha! For plagiarizing my idea. I confessed to that B***starred Finn that year the same way Fourth Master Swan proposed to you. If he doesn't agree, I'll take him to court and sue him for stealing my idea without my permission, Monica said seriously. Jean almost died from laughter. She said, okay, I'll try.
In fact, there were no financial benefits or patent applications, so no legal effect would take place.
But Jeannie, I don't think Fourth Master Swan thought it through well enough. Monica suddenly became very serious, and her words were a little deep. Jean nodded. He really did not think it through well enough. Who the F***ck would get married in such a hurry?
However, she had to admit it. Although she did not want to have any expectations of the wedding, in reality, every woman hoped she would have a special wedding. For it to be in such a hurry.
He shouldn't have plagiarized the idea I used to pursue Finn. It's a bad omen, Monica said. Chapter 323, The Wedding. Announcing it to the world. Jean was stunned. She thought Monica would say that the wedding was too fast and that there was no time to prepare. Look, Finn and I are planning to get a divorce, so obviously, that idea is a bad omen. You're overthinking it with all these omens. Jean was speechless. In short, you and Fourth Master Swan must stay together. Don't follow mine and Finn's footsteps. I regret meeting Finn and even taking the initiative to pursue him. I've never felt so humiliated in my life. Do you have to be so dramatic? Jean thought Jean was a little speechless while holding her phone. At that moment, there was a knock on her door. Director Lawrence, the person in charge of Muck Group has arrived.
Jean nodded. She said into her phone, Monica, I have a meeting. I'll talk to you later.
You're still at work at a time like this. Shouldn't you be resting, doing your beauty treatments, and preparing for the wedding? Ahem. She was very busy. Moreover, the fourth master did not seem to have asked her to prepare anything. She said, I'll talk to you later. After that, she hung up the call. Monica looked at the words, end of call, and felt a little displeased. When she got married back then, even though she was really heartbroken to marry Finn, in the end, in order to make herself the center of attention, she had to prepare more than half a month in advance. On the other hand, Jeannie was too calm. Could it be that she was forced to get married? Forced to get married by Fourth Master Swan? On second thought, no matter what, she had always found Fourth Master Swan and Jean a perfect match. With that, she sat in her office and took out her phone to read the gossip, which was filled with the news of Jean and Fourth Master Swan getting married. It was trending everywhere. Looking at the comments and joining them, she was in a good mood. However, while a few families were happy, a few were worried. The Lawrences were shocked to find out that Jean was going to marry Fourth Master Swan. When Jennifer saw the news, she did not react at all. She thought, how could it be? How could Fourth Master Swan and Jean get married for real? Were they not just in a physical relationship? Was Fourth Master Swan and Jean not together so that he did not have to be related to the Sanders by marriage? How could they get married? She could not take it anymore and called Jasmine, who was also devastated. Jasmine, too, found out through the news that Jean was going to get married to Fourth Master Swan. How could Jean have seduced Fourth Master Swan? Jasmine could not accept it. Jasmine, you've married into the Snow family, but what exactly are you doing? I told you to help the Lawrences, but you couldn't do it and didn't bring us any benefits. Now you can't even send us a message. Why on earth did you marry into the Snow family? Fourth Master Swan is marrying Jean, yet you don't even know. Jennifer was so angry that her voice was trembling. All of Jean's previous achievements aside, Jean was now marrying Fourth Master Swan, which she could not accept. If Jean really got together with Fourth Master Swan, Jean's background would be even stronger. Then, it would be even harder for them to go against Jean. Moreover, would old Master Lawrence, who always put interests first, hand over the Lawrence enterprise to Jean just as she feared? No, she had worked hard all her life just for herself and her children to become true celebrities in upper-class society. She had finally become part of the Lawrences, and the label of being a mistress had disappeared. Now, she just hoped Jasmine and Joshua could have their own status in the upper-class society. Then, their family would be a real upper-class. At first, she was satisfied with Jasmine's development as marrying the eldest young Master Swan could be considered a great leap. Although Joshua was not a good-for-nothing, as the only son of the Lawrences, he would definitely inherit the Lawrences' assets sooner or later, so there was no need to worry too much in the future. Yet now, Jean has popped up out of the blue and distributed her plan. She even believed that Jean's return this time was not a simple one. Jean was back just to take revenge, and once she got everything she wanted, she would kill all of them. No, she had worked hard her entire life. She definitely could not let it go to waste. The scowl on Jennifer's face was visible. Jasmine, on the other end of the phone, was having a breakdown. I really don't know how Fourth Master Swan and Jean got together. There wasn't even a whisper about it, and suddenly, they announced they were getting married. I have asked Eden before too. He always said that used goods like Jean could never marry his uncle, whose father would never agree to this marriage, so I didn't take it to heart. Moreover, I always thought Fourth Master Swan and Jean only got together to stop the Sanders. I didn't expect that they would really. Chapter 324. The Wedding. Announcing it to the world. When Jasmine said it, her eyes turned red with anger. If Jean did marry Fourth Master Swan, her seniority would be lower than Jean's. More importantly, although they were married to a swan, Jean would be married to the current man holding the power in the swans. In that case, Jean's status would naturally be higher than hers in the family. At that thought, she was infuriated. What kind of ability did a woman like Jean have to seduce Fourth Master Swan? Who did she think she was? Jasmine, I'm really disappointed in you. Jennifer said fiercely, you better do something in the swans and think about how to make it hard for Jean to stay in the swans. Mom, can you think of a way to get Jean not to marry Fourth Master Swan? I don't want her to marry him. If she marries him, my pride. Pride? Are you talking to me about pride? My pride has been ruined. Look at what the media has written. They're saying the Lawrences have put all our attention on you when, in fact, Jean is the dark horse. They even said that I'm the one causing trouble. In other words, I'm the evil stepmother. I want to kill Jean now. Jasmine had also seen the news. She bit her lips, gnashing her teeth in pain. But there are still 3 days left. I can't think of a way to stop Jean from getting married, Jennifer said. I'm afraid that if I do something now, people will say that I deliberately destroyed Jean's marriage. For now, I'll swallow my anger. In the face of such an important event, she still knew her limits. Jasmine knew her mother was more considerate than them, so she could only listen to her. You best act happy in front of outsiders. No matter how we feel about it, we have to give Jean our blessings. Do you understand? Jasmine did not want to agree to it. I'm really furious now, Jennifer said fiercely. Goodbye. Then, she hung up the call, but even after that, her expression was extremely ugly. That woman, Jean, was getting more and more out of hand. Jean was, in fact, a little busy. She would never waste a second on work matters, and if she could make the fastest progress with her work, she would choose the fastest way. Yet now, she looked at the message on her phone. Ed, I'm waiting for you downstairs. He really was a stumbling block in her life. Jean took a deep breath and picked up the phone. Amy, the meeting in 10 minutes is cancelled. I'll be off work now. Tell the project team to prepare all the materials according to my requirements. Yes, Amy said respectfully. Director Lawrence, will you be working overtime tonight? It depends. You don't have to wait for me. All right. With that, Jean picked up her bag and left the office. She had planned her work until the eve of her wedding. However, it seemed that it was too difficult now. By the time she went downstairs, it was still time to get off work, so a lot of people were coming and going. Many people saw Fourth Master Swan standing there with a bouquet of roses in his arms. At the sight of her, the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. At that moment, she heard people exclaim all around her. With that, she quickly ran over, took the initiative to hold Fourth Master Swan's hand, and sat in the small car. She had always found the man too eye-catching. That was why she had to hide. Fourth Master Swan seemed to be in a good mood, especially with Jean's small hand holding his tightly. Fourth Master, where are we going? Jean asked. They had already met his father last night. What were they going to do tonight? To yours, Edward Said straightforwardly. Jean was stunned. I'm going to ask for their approval. Jean was speechless. He had already announced the marriage, yet he still wanted to ask for their approval? Was he trying to piss Alexander off? However, Jean did not stop him. Just like that, she and Fourth Master Swan returned to the Lawrence's family manor. To be honest, when she saw Alexander at the company today, he did not look too happy. He probably did not expect that she would really marry Fourth Master Swan. In his heart, he probably thought she could, at most, be Fourth Master Swan's secret lover. Then, out of the blue, she was the Swan's fourth madam. He would most definitely lose his pride in front of her. The two of them walked into the hall together. In the hall, Alexander was already in a bad mood, so when he saw Fourth Master Swan with Jean, the expression on his face instantly changed for the worst. Chapter 325, The Wedding. Announcing it to the world. He quickly went forward. Fourth Master Swan is here too. He was quite enthusiastic. Jean thought it was a pity that Alexander was not an actor. If he wanted to act as a bad guy in a supporting role, he could definitely win the award for the best supporting role. At that moment, Jennifer also came over in a hurry and greeted Edward warmly. Welcome, Fourth Master. Thank you. Edward also appeared to be very polite. Then, he said, I came today mainly to discuss with you my marriage with Jeannie. Jeannie. Jean's heart skipped a beat. It was her first time hearing Fourth Master Swan say the word, Jeannie. He usually addressed her as Ms. Lawrence, which sounded a little distant, but she thought it sounded a little flirty coming from his mouth.
Oh, is that so? Embarrassment washed over Alexander's face for a few seconds before he joked, I've seen the news. I didn't know your relationship had developed to this stage. You guys have hidden your relationship very well.
Jean, who was standing at the side, really wanted to laugh. The Lawrences were indeed two-faced, and they were amazing at it. We have never hidden it. Edward did not give Alexander a way out. What he meant was that he had been dating Jean the entire time, but they just did not care about her. Alexander was a little embarrassed, so Jennifer quickly tried to smooth things over. Come in and sit down. After all, we are a family now. Edward nodded and walked to the sofa while holding Jean's hand. Watching their fingers interlocked, Jennifer suppressed her emotions and continued to greet them with a smile on her face. On the sofa, Edward went straight to the point. The wedding is scheduled for the 16th, which is 3 days later. The timing is a little abrupt, but don't worry. You can leave everything to me. All you need to do is be there with Jean on the wedding day. Oh, okay, we'll go with your arrangements. Alexander quickly nodded. As for the wedding gifts and dowry, for the dowry, there's no need for you to prepare it because time is too tight, and I don't want you to worry about it. Moreover, my father has said that he doesn't care about these ostentatious arrangements. Edward sighed bluntly. As for the wedding gifts, my father said that we'll prepare them according to your wishes.
As the old man said, we aren't the kind of people to put much emphasis on ostentation as well.
Since we're saving on the dowry, you don't have to spend too much on the wedding gifts. In fact, we're fine as long as you guys are fine with it. There's no need for all the visiting. I'd rather not go through all the formalities, said Alexander. Since the other party had made their point clear, if he were to open his mouth and ask for the wedding gifts, what would people say when word of this spread? Since you've said so, I'll go with the Swan's arrangements. Yes, sure. Alexander nodded his head. He knew it was impossible for such a large family like the Swans to not gift them with anything. Then, he heard Edward say, I've prepared 8% of the Swan's original shares. On the day of the wedding, I will transfer all the shares to Jeannie. That will be considered my wedding gift. Alexander looked at Edward, speechless and too stunned to react. At that moment, Jean felt like laughing again. Alexander probably did not expect that Fourth Master Swan would give out the shares of the Swans. What was more, he did not expect that Fourth Master Swan would give it to her directly and not to the Lawrences. I believe you and my father share the same thoughts. Since Jeannie and I are getting married, the so-called wedding gift and dowry should fall on us, Edward sighed in a dignified manner. Jean could see Alexander's face distorting in anger. Only after a long while did Alexander reply, yes, that's right. Old Master Swan is indeed thoughtful. In that case, the dowry and wedding gifts are decided. It's decided. Alexander nodded his head. However, he did not mean what he said. I still have some things to attend to tonight, so I will take my leave now. Edward stood up from the sofa. Jean was puzzled as she thought he would stay at the Lawrences for dinner. Let's have dinner before you leave, Alexander said enthusiastically.
Once Jeannie and I are married, there will be many opportunities for us to have dinner in the future. There's no need for that tonight. Edward refused.
Seeing that Edward had matters to attend to, Alexander did not make things difficult for him and thus agreed.
With that, Edward turned around and left. Jean followed him. I'll send you out.
A smile hung on Edward's lips again. Jean saw Edward out at the main entrance. To be honest, she was still a little surprised at Fourth Master Swan's efficiency in handling matters. When they were discussing marriage just now, he was so domineering that the other party did not have the power to resist at all. Even his departure now was easy. Chapter 326. The Wedding. Announcing it to the world. Fourth Master, are you sure you don't want to have dinner together? Jean asked when she saw that Edward was about to get into the car. Edward stopped in his tracks as he stepped into the car and then turned around. Jean smiled. If he did not prefer to eat at the Lawrences, she could eat with him somewhere else. Compared to having dinner, I'd rather eat. You, Ms. Lawrence. Jean's heart skipped a beat, and her face blushed red. So, I'll see you, said the man as he got in his car. With that, he left, leaving Jean standing there in a daze. When Fourth Master Swan was starting the car just now, she was angry but dared to say anything. However, she suddenly thought of something and dialed Fourth Master Swan's number. The voice on the other end sounded like he was smiling. If Ms. Lawrence can't bear to part with me, I can come back immediately. No, Jean refused flatly, which made the other party unhappy. Jean said, I forgot to tell you something. Ms. Lawrence, please speak. Her tone was cold. Are we going to have a wedding ceremony? Jean asked. She was not sure if there would be a wedding ceremony. She had a feeling that Fourth Master Swan might just drive a car to pick her up, and that was all. Is Miss Lawrence doubting me? No, I said I would be fine with the wedding as long as Fourth Master is happy with it, and I wouldn't interfere. But what I mean is, if there is a ceremony, can Monica be my bridesmaid? Jean asked. On the other end of the phone, Edward was surprised. Why not? Isn't it Harkin's rule that married women are not allowed to be bridesmaids? To me, Miss Lawrence is the rule. Edward's magnetic voice echoed in Jean's ears. Everything and everyone else is insignificant. She found that Fourth Master Swan had a way with words. Do you have any other needs? I'll try my best to satisfy them. That's all. Are you sure that's all? Edward asked. Should she still have more needs? Moreover, why did Fourth Master Swan sound unhappy? She thought for a moment and said, there's still one more. Please speak. His tone sounded a little lighter. Should Fourth Master Swan not be someone who hated being troubled? However, at that moment, why did she feel that Fourth Master Swan was happy for her to trouble him? She said, "Can you not call me Ms. Lawrence?" The person on the other end of the phone paused for a moment. Jean bit her lip. She thought it sounded nice when he called her Jeannie. Besides, they were about to get married, and it was not a good idea for him to treat her as an outsider. When she said that, the other side suddenly fell silent.
Was she too controlling? In fact, it was just a form of address, so it was not important.
The moment she began to feel awkward, she hurriedly opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, Fourth Master Swan said, "Just 2 more days."
Oh, Jean was surprised. The form of address. Just 2 more days.
Did it mean that Fourth Master Swan was trying to spice things up, or that he still needed time to develop his feelings for her? Anyway, Jean smiled and said, "Actually, it's just a form of address. You can call me whatever you want, as long as you like it." "Okay," he replied. "Take care, Fourth Master. I'm hanging up now." "Okay." After hanging up, Jean took a deep breath. She did not know why, but every time she spoke to the Fourth Master, she felt overwhelmed. Even though he said he liked her, she still felt like she was trying to play up to him. She still felt that he was too out of her reach. After that, Jean returned to the hall, where the atmosphere was tense. Jean had expected Alexander to be unhappy because he did not receive any benefits. However, Jean ignored him and went straight upstairs. "You're really proud now, huh?" Alexander snapped behind her. Jean sneered and turned her head to look at him. "Shouldn't you be happy for me for marrying Fourth Master Swan? However, why do I feel that, with that mocking tone of yours, you don't want me to live a good life?" "Jean, I'm not your biological child, am I?" Jean asked. "That's enough." Alexander was furious. Jean could not care less about Alexander's temper at all. "Jean, you really shouldn't think too highly of yourself. If a swan's wedding can be so abrupt, so much that they don't even want our dowry, do you think they value this wedding very much? It's just a formality. Fourth Master said he would give me 8% of the swan's shares." "Do you really believe that?" Alexander was being sarcastic. "When the time comes, you'll see all the additional conditions placed on that 8% of shares. In name, it'll be yours, but in reality, it'll still be the swan's. It is just for show." Chapter 327. The Wedding. Announcing it to the world.
Jean pursed her lips, thinking that was also possible.
"You'd better have some self-awareness of what you're getting yourself into with the marriage," Alexander said fiercely. At that moment, Jean said obediently, "Thanks for your advice." After that, she did not linger around and immediately went upstairs. Seeing that Jean did not respect him at all, his expression remained grim. Jennifer quickly comforted him. "Alexander, you've made your point across that the Fourth Master didn't put so much effort into marrying Jean. First of all, with regards to the wedding, it would definitely be simple since they only have 3 days to prepare. Think about how grand Jasmine's wedding was. Now that was a legitimate marriage. For the type of wedding Jean is having, this wedding is just for them to go through the motions, and the Swans definitely didn't put too much effort into it. Then, the matter of the shares is hilarious. How could the Swans give the shares to Jean? Think about it. If they were really sincere, they would give it to you. Yet, they're giving it to Jean, which means they're trying to cover up the authenticity of the transfer of the shares. For the Swans to get to where they are now, there must be a reason behind it. You don't have to be unhappy just because of Jean's petty achievements." Rather than consoling Alexander, she was, in fact, consoling herself that was all to Jean's marriage to Fourth Master Swan. Alexander snorted, seemingly persuaded by Jennifer. Jennifer held Alexander's hand. "At most, we'll just go along with his acting. However, don't flatter them too much, in case Fourth Master Swan and Jean break up one day and embarrass us." Alexander nodded and said fiercely, "I'd like to see how smug Jean will be at the wedding in 3 days." Jennifer quickly said, "She won't be. It's a simple wedding. No matter how nice it sounds, she will become a laughingstock in the end. Let's wait and see." Jennifer smiled coldly. When the time came, she could find a few reporters in private and deliberately mock Jean in the media.
That was her plan, her sinister plan. The wedding 3 days later arrived as scheduled. On the day of the wedding, the news broke out again.
After all, Fourth Master Swan's prestige was too high, so his wedding naturally attracted the attention of everyone in the city. For a moment, the topics were endless, and they were all on the trending lists. Jean was woken up by the staff at 5 a.m. She had worked overtime until 10 p.m. last night. When she returned home, removed her makeup, and washed up, it was already close to 12 a.m. then. The thought of her getting married the next day gave her insomnia, and it was probably past 1 a.m. when she really fell asleep until she was woken up again. She usually did not sleep much, but it was definitely not on the lesser end. She still needed 7 or 8 hours a day. Moreover, she never thought she would be woken up at 5 a.m. Was it not just putting on a wedding dress and makeup, and then waiting for Fourth Master Swan to pick her up? Her thoughts were very simple. She assumed that she would get up at 7 or 8 a.m. Still, she still endured it at that moment and washed her face with cold water to force herself to wake up. As soon as she was fully awake, she was a little dumbfounded. Were her eyes playing tricks on her? Why was she seeing a grand white wedding gown in her bedroom? It was exquisitely embroidered with a corset, and the sleeves at her waist were sewn with thin diamonds that dazzled under the light. The gown was from a well-known designer in Harkin who made wedding dresses, and only people with enough status could have it. The wedding gown was hand-embroidered and hand-stitched, so it was expensive and took a long time to complete. How did Fourth Master Swan get them to do it in 4 days?
Could it be a replica? Ms. Lawrence, this wedding gown was hand-stitched by Harkin's top designer, Old Master Adams. It is hand-stitched with needle and thread, and it is priceless, the staff introduced.
Jean frowned. Isn't Old Master Adams over 80 years old? He personally guided his proudest disciple to complete it.
However, the most classic part is the embroidery on the collar, which Old Master Adams personally sewed. The staff member said, a dress of his with that embroidery has been sold at a sky-high price of over 100 million at the World Auction House, but from then on, Old Master Adams never produced it again. It can be said that the piece you're seeing now, Ms. Lawrence, is his final work. It's not only worth a fortune, but it's also priceless.
In short, it was so expensive that no one could buy one. Chapter 328, The Wedding, announcing it to the world.
Ms. Lawrence, please allow us to help you put it on, the staff member said respectfully.
Are you sure Fourth Master Swan prepared this for me? Jean was still a little uncertain. She had always assumed their wedding would be with a simple white wedding dress and a black suit. However, now that it was a designer dress, she was surprised. I'm sure, the staff member smiled. With that, Jean pursed her lips. In that case, thank you. Ms. Lawrence, you don't have to be so polite. While the staff member said that, she went forward to help Jean change into her wedding dress. Then, the room door was suddenly pushed open. Monica's carefree voice sounded. D**MN, do you have to be so early? George was still sleeping, so when he heard the voice, he covered himself with the blanket. His small face looked very unhappy. Jean turned her head to look at Monica. After all that shouting, Monica's gaze instantly fell on the wedding gown in front of her. Her eyes were wide open. My God! What the hell is this? Is this Old Master Adams' gown? The legendary designer wedding gown? Yes, Ms. Cardellini, the staff quickly replied. D**MN. Monica circled around the white wedding gown and almost drooled. This is absolutely beautiful, Monica exclaimed. Jean also thought it was absolutely beautiful, so much that it was shocking. Ms. Cardellini, you also have a bridesmaid dress. Come over here, I'll help you change into it. Oh, okay. Monica was instantly attracted. In the meantime, Jean changed into her wedding gown with the help of the staff. The gown had 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. It was very complicated. After all, the more expensive the item, the more steps there were. Jean felt that just changing into the dress alone took an hour. Since it was not easy to change into, it made her wonder how she would take it off. On the other hand, Monica had gotten changed long ago. She was wearing a pink dress that was slightly old-fashioned, conveying Harkin's concept of traditional beauty, but it had an elegant and modern design. Alone, it was a really beautiful dress, but next to Jean's wedding dress, it looked much more elegant. As a bridesmaid's dress, it was just right. Not only would she not steal the bride's show when they stood together, but even without the bride, she would shine. Monica was very satisfied. The two of them sat in front of the makeup mirror as they got their makeup done. Monica looked at Jean's extremely complicated makeup and could not help but ask, did Fourth Master Swan prepare all of this? Probably, Jean replied. She did not know either, mainly because she was not involved in the wedding planning. They did not even take wedding photos, and she did not even ask if they would. Why do I feel like he has put in a lot of effort? Monica was really envious.
Thinking back to her own wedding back then, she was the one who did all the work, and Finn did not care. At that time, all she wanted was to make herself look good, so she was the one who chose the wedding dress.
What a contrast. Compared to this, she felt that her wedding was really weak.
The next time she got married, she would have to plan carefully. The two of them spent more than an hour putting on makeup before the hairstylist did their hair. Ms. Lawrence, because the gown is so gorgeous, we will have the accessories a little simpler. However, don't worry, no matter how simple the accessories are, they're not cheap, the staff member explained.
Speaking of which, did she look poor? It was Fourth Master Swan who told us to tell Ms. Lawrence that. As if she could read Jean's mind, the staff member hurriedly explained. At the side, Monica could not help but laugh. The Fourth Master is quite funny. Was he afraid that Jean would dislike him? To think he would send someone to tell Jean that the wedding today had cost a lot of money? This is a golden hairpin. The craftsmanship may look simple, but it actually requires a lot of skill.
It is a finished product made by Harkin's cultural and heritage jeweler, Mr. Williams, who has failed over 100 times. Some experts have determined that the golden hairpin is currently worth tens of millions, but because Mr. Williams is eccentric and does not care about money, his accessories are only sold to those he wants to. In other words, even if you have money, you may not be able to buy it.
Jean listened quietly to the staff member introduce the accessories to her. At first, she thought it would be very boring, but on the contrary, she found it quite interesting. Monica's makeup and hair were a little simpler, so after she was done, she listened to the staff member's explanation with much interest. This is a jade bracelet. The staff member put the bracelet on Jean's wrist, and it was just the right size. Moreover, the color was translucent, and it was very smooth. With one look, one could tell that it was expensive. Monica also observed it very carefully. When she did not get an explanation after waiting for a long time, she said, "Why didn't you say anything about this?" The staff smiled. Fourth Master said that this used to belong to his mother, so there's no need to explain. Ms. Lawrence should know its value. From money to status, Fourth Master Swan was really showing off. After all, he had already taken out his family heirloom. Jean was a little moved. Everything on her body probably could not compare to the value of that bracelet. After a long time, her makeup and hair were finally done. By then, it was already 10 a.m. in the morning. It really did take 5 hours to get a bride ready. Just as she was all done up, she heard someone shout downstairs, "Fourth Master Swan is here to pick up the bride." It was clearly Knox's voice, and he was announcing it to the world. Chapter 329. The Wedding. "Jean, my heart. Fourth Master Swan is here to pick up the bride." Knox's voice rang out in the Lawrence family manner. Jean's heart suddenly skipped a beat. Her heartbeat was irregular and somewhat crazy. She did not know what she was looking forward to at that moment, but she felt strangely excited. Before she could react, Monica suddenly stood up. Completely ignoring the fact that she was wearing 3-inch high heels on her feet, she rushed to the door and quickly closed it. Jean was stunned by Monica's sudden action. By then, George had already woken up. He was wearing a custom-made white suit that possessed many similarities to Jean's gown. Not to mention the color, the embroidery was incredibly exquisite. It was clearly just formal attire for a child, but the workmanship was shocking. Wearing it, George really did look like a noble young master from a prestigious family. At that moment, everyone in the room, including more than 10 makeup artists and staff members, instantly turned their attention to Monica. Monica did not care about her image at all, or to put it bluntly, she did not have any. She put herself against the door, and her expression was particularly exaggerated. She did not look like a rich young lady at all. She said excitedly, "Jeannie, you can't give yourself to him so easily." Without even thinking about it, Jean knew that the girl must have a plan. Just at the right time, knocking sounds came from outside the door, followed by Knox's somewhat exaggerated voice. "Bride, open the door. The groom is here to pick you up." Monica yelled from inside, "Who said that we have to hand the bride over when the groom is here? There ain't no such thing as a free lunch." "Monica, I just knew you would be the worst. Tell me, what do you want us to do?" Knox looked as if he had already mentally prepared himself. Monica said loudly, "How about this? I'll give you 2 3-year-old brain teasers. If you answer correctly, I'll open the door." "This is an insult to my intelligence. Tell me now. What 5-letter word becomes shorter when you add 5 letters to it?" Monica asked loudly. When she asked the question, not only were the people outside guessing, but the people inside were also guessing. There was some noise outside but no answer. "I'll give you 10 seconds to answer," Monica said loudly. The countdown had not yet started. "Short." Finn's voice came from outside the door. Monica gritted her teeth. When the answer was revealed, the people inside exclaimed in realization, "Is that right?" Knox asked. "Next." Monica said again, "What does an elephant's ear look like?" "A fan." Knox answered almost without thinking. Monica laughed out loud. Wrong. Knox, you're no smarter than a 3-year-old child. Knox began cursing outside. I'll give you one more chance. What does an elephant's ear look like? Monica looked as if she had succeeded.
It looks like the other ear. Finn's voice sounded again.
Monica was completely stunned. F***ck. How did that B***starred Finn know? Outside the door, Knox was also a little surprised too. He sighed at Finn. Brother, you're pretty amazing. Finn smiled in response. Last night, a certain woman at home was probably more excited than today's bride. She made a lot of noise, saying that she would not allow the fourth master to marry Jeannie so smoothly tomorrow. Hence, she spent the whole night coming up with something at home, and he accidentally saw the brain teasers on a piece of paper. However, he did not know what questions she had prepared, so he memorized them before going to bed last night. As expected, Monica only remembered the simplest ones. Are you done? Knox asked. No. You only answered 2 questions that 3-year-old children can answer, and you want to take our bride away? If you have any other requests, tell us now, and we will satisfy all of them. Knox's tone was a bit sloppy, but it was better to liven up the atmosphere on such an occasion. I don't want you to fulfill them. Go to your side. Monica shouted towards the door. Where's the groom? Here. Edward's magnetic voice sounded. It was just one word, but it made Jean, who was sitting in the room and already a little nervous, feel her heart skip a few beats. Something in her eyes moved as she stared at the door intently. Her gown was too extravagant, so she sat on the edge of the bed the entire time, from after putting on her clothes to putting on her makeup. The white hem of her gown was spread all over the floor. Chapter 330. The Wedding. Jean, my heart. She bit her lips lightly and waited. As everyone knows, you and my Jeannie got married in a flash. Therefore, we need to test how well you know Jeannie. Monica said loudly, I'll ask you 10 questions about her, and you have to answer each question within 3 seconds. Otherwise, it will be considered a failure. Okay, Edward agreed. Please listen carefully. In a formal manner, Monica asked, please tell me how old Jeannie is this year. 25 years old. Please tell me when is Jeannie's birthday? April 12th. Please tell me Jeannie's height. I estimate her height to be 1.6 meters, Edward answered. Monica was about to speak, but Jean's expression had changed as well. Did she look that short? Fourth Master Swan was just a little taller than her. Why did he have to say that she was only 1.6 meters tall? Her actual height is 1.66 meters. Monica paused for a moment. So the fourth master knows how to joke, huh? Jean was displeased. Continue. Monica asked again. Please tell me what Jeannie's bust, waist, and hip measurements are. Edward did not answer, to which Knox could not help but say, Monica is going all out on this game. 34C, 24, 36. The other side answered accurately. F***ck. Monica cursed softly. She turned her head and asked Jean in a low voice, is that right? Jean blushed and nodded. There was indeed something fishy going on between those two people. Hey, why aren't you talking? Knox urged. Next question. Monica said aloud, please tell me Jeannie's shoe size? Size 36. Please tell me what Jeannie's favorite food is? Chicken. Parmigiana with pasta. Edward paused for a moment when he answered. He originally wanted to say chicken soup because when Jean was at Monica's the last time, she seemed to like it very much. However, when the two of them were alone for a week, she said that she wanted to eat chicken parmigiana with pasta. May I ask when was the first time you kissed? Monica suddenly changed the topic. Everyone seemed to pause for a moment. There was also no response from the people outside the door. You only have 3 seconds to think. 3, 2. 7 years ago, August 21st. Monica suddenly looked at Jean. Did she hear wrongly? 7 years ago. When did Jean and Fourth Master Swan cross paths 7 years ago? Jean's eyes sparkled. That night was the night she climbed into Fourth Master Swan's bed. With her face blushed red, she nodded her head. Monica looked at Jean and smiled evilly. Fourth Master, you and Jeannie have been hiding it really well, huh? Yes, Edward replied, and he did not forget to remind Monica. This is also considered a question. I have answered a total of 7 questions. Ms. Cardellini, you still have 3 more questions to go. D***mn. That fellow was too calculative. Nevertheless, it did not bother Monica, who continued to ask, what part of the genie do you like the most? Her hand, Edward sighed straightforwardly. Why? Monica was a little surprised. Most men would say their eyes, lips, face, the desire to live, and all that, but her hand. Monica looked at Jean's fair hand and admitted that Jean did have nice hands. However, fourth Master Swan's hobbies were too unique. It's because Miss Lawrence uses her hands to do things I like, Edward said bluntly. Peeved. Monica almost burst out laughing. Did she misunderstand him? Outside the door, Knox almost died from laughing. Did it mean that? Monica looked at Jean's tomato red face. At that moment, Jean unconsciously clenched her hands into a small fist, with the urge to kill fourth Master Swan right there and then. It was the first time that Monica found fourth Master Swan so amiable. She used to think of him as an elder and a distant one at that. Yet now, he was just someone of the same age as her, and he was especially good at saying dirty things. She made a meal that I like, Edward added. F***ck. Ms. Cardellini, let me remind you that you still have one last question, Edward said bluntly. She clearly had two more. F***ck. Though, why, just now also counted. With that, she gritted her teeth. She always felt that she could not outsmart fourth Master Swan.
Then, she said, last question. Please go ahead. When did the fourth master start to like Jean? That question was something that she was really curious about. When did the two of them start to have feelings for each other? After all, she was still a little surprised that they got married so suddenly. Everyone was waiting for Edward's answer with anticipation on their faces. A few seconds passed, and even Monica had forgotten to count down.
Chapter 331. The Wedding. Jean, my heart. The answer was taking a little long, so long that Jean was starting to get nervous. Did it not happen over the last few days? Did he have to think about it for so long? It felt as if he did not know if he liked her or not. However, at that moment, Edward suddenly said, since I was young. What? Monica thought she had heard wrongly. The others also thought that they had also heard wrongly. Monica quickly reacted. Since you were young? How young? Ms. Cardellini, you have already asked all 10 questions, Edward reminded her. Monica almost choked on her saliva. The last question was clearly the most important one. Could it be that fourth Master Swan had taken a liking to Jeannie since she was young? At that thought, Monica shuddered. Did that mean when Jeannie and Eden were dating, fourth Master Swan was just watching them? Just as she was trying to imagine that scene. Monica, you've asked so many questions. Can you let us in now? It's getting late, and we don't want to miss such a meaningful day, Knox said out loud. Monica looked at the time and knew she could not take up too much time. Hence, she thought for a while and said, I can let you pass, but you have to pay me. Well, you have to open the door so I can hand you the money, Knox shouted. What if I open the door and you rush in? I'm such a weak woman. How dare you have the nerve to say you're weak? Knox's tone was twice as high. If you're weak, could you have locked up such a group of men outside the door? Monica could not help but laugh, feeling a sense of accomplishment. She said, Knox, I'll open the door in a while. Don't push it. Don't worry, Knox immediately agreed. Only then did Monica unlock the door. As soon as she did, men were all liars. Monica had just unlocked the door when it was suddenly pushed open, and she almost fell to the ground. At the same time, a large hand suddenly grabbed hers and pulled her into an embrace the next second. It was a very familiar embrace. Monica looked at Finn in a daze. Finn knew from Knox's actions that he would use brute force. Hence, the moment the door opened, he quickly pulled Monica to his side. Monica's heart skipped a beat. Then, she heard Finn say, Aren't you going to ask for the money? Monica pushed Finn away, quickly walked toward Knox, and stood in front of him and fourth Master Swan. You can't go back on your words. Monica looked valiant and spirited. Knox. Edward's thin lips moved. Okay. When Knox received the order, he quickly took out a particularly thick envelope and handed it to Monica. Fourth Master Swan specially prepared it for you. Thank you. It was rare for Knox to be so gentlemanly. The moment Monica took it, she weighed it in her hands. Not bad, she thought, very satisfied with this thickness. After that, Knox took out more envelopes and spread them all over Jean's bedroom. There were a lot of them. The staff also loved to have a good time, so they quickly snatched them up. It was a lively scene, but all the excitement seemed to be on other people. Edward and Jean only had eyes for each other. However, Jean was a little shy from Edward's stare. Ever since Monica let them in, she had noticed Edward's gaze on her body, sizing her up. Although she was dressed so conservatively, in so many layers of fabric, he was looking at her with an indescribable feeling. Jean secretly gritted her teeth and pulled out a smile from the corner of her mouth. Do I look good? Edward's eyes were still on her. Only after a long time did he finally react. Pretty good. You call this pretty good? Monica appeared out of nowhere. Just a second ago, she was fighting with ordinary people for money and bickering with Knox. However, she suddenly noticed them and rushed over. The other people's attention was also instantly on a newlywed couple. At first, I didn't think Jeannie was suited for this kind of good-natured woman's get-up. After all, she had such alluring features that could bring disaster to the country and the people, Monica said without holding anything back. Jean was speechless. Did she invite Monica to be the bridesmaid to pull her down? However, the moment I saw the gown on Jeannie, I felt like I was blind back then. Jeannie is a young lady from an aristocratic family. With her class, dignity, and beauty, it's clear that this designer gown was tailor-made for Jeannie. Monica commented, "Fourth Master really has a good taste to have made the alluring-looking Jeannie look like such a good wife and mother." Chapter 332. The Wedding. Jean, my heart. In the first half, Jean thought that Monica was going on the right track, but in the second half, she had thought too much of Monica in the first half. Seemingly very satisfied with Jean's get-up today, the corners of Edward's mouth lifted into a smile. Then, he walked over. Just as he was about to pick up Jean and leave, Monica suddenly jumped in front of Edward. How could it be so easy? Monica stood between them with lots of envelopes in her hands. "Ms. Cardellini, do you have any other requests?" "Monica, it's getting late. We must be at the Swan family's manor at 11:18 a.m. If we don't, we'll be late," Knox reminded her. I know what to do." Monica glanced at Knox unhappily. Knox did not even know how such a mature Jean had Monica as her best friend. No matter how he saw it, he found Monica like a monkey and completely incompatible with Jean's personality. He could not understand it. However, what he could not understand more was how Monica had subdued Finn too. Was Monica poisonous? Monica was not in the mood to deal with Knox's nonsensical thought, so she looked at Edward and said, "Casson." Monica suddenly called out to a staff member in the room. She had discussed it with the staff member when Jean was putting on her makeup. "Ms. Cardellini." Casson quickly walked to them with a plate of candies in hand. Monica took one of the candies from the plate. There was a rope on the candy, so it was obvious that she had something in mind. She smiled cunningly. "The two of you, eat this piece of candy together, and you have to finish it." Jean frowned. At that moment, she saw Monica hold the rope and place the candy in front of the two of them, next to their lips. It was as if. Jean glanced at Edward. She thought that if he did not like it, they did not have to do it. Unexpectedly, Edward bent down and leaned over, wanting to eat the candy. Monica was quick-witted and quickly held the candy up. Then, Edward's lips were pressed directly onto Jean's lips. Jean's heart skipped a beat, and she looked at Fourth Master Swan, who was so close to her, looking at him looking at her in the same way. They both looked at each other with their lips pressed tightly together. After a long while, "Fourth Master, is Jeannie's mouth sweeter than candy?" Monica could not help but tease. They both had been kissing each other for too long that it made Jean a little embarrassed. She moved slightly and parted with Fourth Master Swan's lips. Suddenly, Fourth Master Swan pursed his lips and even used his tongue to lick his lips after. Monica was standing very close to them, so she saw it all. Fourth Master Swan was really F***C king perverted and seductive. If her heart did not belong to someone else, and if Fourth Master Swan was not Jeannie's man, she might have been seduced. She just watched as Jeannie was teased until her little face was completely red, which contrasted with her white gown. "The taste isn't bad," Fourth Master Swan said pensively. The moment he said it, even Monica's face turned red. Jean was doomed. Monica could not help but secretly sigh. Jeannie would definitely fall into Fourth Master Swan's hands for her entire life. Speaking of which, who the hell said that Fourth Master Swan was cold and abstinent? At that moment, she looked at Jeannie, who looked like she was about to erupt. She snapped back to her senses. "Hey, I told you guys to eat candy. Who said you could eat each other's mouths?" Monica said bluntly. The moment she said it, everyone laughed, and Jean laughed even more awkwardly. "Go on." Monica placed the candies in front of the two of them again. This time, Edward's eyes narrowed, and he took a bite out of it the next second. "Ah!" Monica was shocked. How was the fellow so accurate? She had not had enough fun yet. By then, the candy was already in Edward's mouth, and he pulled the rope out of her mouth to eat the candy. "Is there any more?" Fourth Master Swan asked. "Nope." That was all she had prepared. At first, she thought they would have to leave even before they completed everything she had prepared, not expecting that Fourth Master Swan would complete it so quickly. She was, in fact, a little unhappy when suddenly, an idea struck her. Stars shone in her eyes. When Jean saw Monica's eyes, she knew something was off again. On the other hand, Edward was calm. Monica said, "Fourth Master, although you and Jeannie have been secretly dating for a long time, we don't know how long it has been. From our point of view, the two of you have just started dating. Since you have just started dating and are already getting married, you must show us how sincere you are toward Jeannie." Chapter 333. The Wedding. "Jean, my heart. What does Ms. Cardellini want me to do?" "Confess," Monica said firmly. "Fourth Master, confess your love to her." Jean was speechless. Monica could really think of anything. The others looked at Edward the same way, seemingly waiting for him to say something. Even Knox was extremely quiet as he waited. He believed Fourth Master Swan was not the type who would say any lovey-dovey words. However, the more he thought so, the more curious he became. Edward seemed to be thinking about what to say for a while. Just as he was about to speak, Monica suddenly interrupted, "Wait." Edward's eyes moved slightly. Knox could not stand it anymore. He was very excited to find out what Fourth Master Swan would say, but Monica suddenly interrupted him. The others in the room seemed to share the same feeling.
Knox could not help but say to Finn beside him, "What do you see in Monica? She's so rude."
Finn pursed his lips and did not answer. In fact, he did not know what he saw in Monica either. What was it? He looked at Monica only to see her smiling so innocently, deliberately making things difficult for Fourth Master Swan. "I don't want to hear things like 'I like you, I love you, and I'll be good to you for the rest of my life.' I'm sick of that. Come up with something special." Then, Monica suddenly thought of something. She opened her mouth and said, "I read a book before, and I can't remember the plot clearly. However, what I do have an impression of is that the male lead was extremely flirtatious when he got married. On the wedding day, the bridesmaid asked the male lead to confess to the female lead, and the male lead said, 'If being sexy was a crime, you'd be guilty as charged.'" Everyone looked at Monica, speechless. Monica smiled brightly. "Something like that will do." Sometimes, Jean did not know how Monica grew up to be so weird in upper-class society. Edward glanced at Monica. Monica looked as if she knew everything. "You must have wanted to sleep with Jeannie for a long time now." Jean could not allow Monica to be the bridesmaid next time, not even if she was beaten to death. However, would there be a next time? She pursed her lips, her face looking a little irritated. By then, Edward had ignored Monica. He was standing in front of Jean when suddenly, he knelt on one knee. As Monica watched from the side, she could not help but feel that Fourth Master Swan was very domineering even when he was kneeling. On his knees, he said to Jean in his magnetic voice, "Jeannie, my heart." Jean's heartbeat raced. In fact, her heart had already begun to beat faster the moment Fourth Master Swan knelt on the floor. Then, when she heard his magnetic voice and said such poetic words, her heart began to beat even faster. Everyone was somewhat shocked by his words too. It was such a common poem, but just by changing the order of the words and cleverly putting her name in, it seemed to convey a different emotion. It was a different and powerful sense of love. It even touched everyone. No, Monica's little heart could not take it anymore. To be honest, that sentence did touch her a little as she thought it was very beautiful and moving. She could not help but mutter, "The Fourth Master is really handsome." He was so handsome that she could not bear to make things difficult for him. However, next to her, Finn heard her muttering loud and clear. As he looked at her, he saw, from her eyes, how moved and envious she was. It was the kind of envy toward something good. Instead of being jealous, it came from a good place. Finn's eyes moved slightly, and he chose to ignore it. After Edward confessed, he stood up, bent down, and carried Jean in a domineering manner. Jean's gown had a lot of layers to it, so she did not dare to act rashly either and hugged Fourth Master Swan's neck naturally. The staff quickly tidied the hem of Jean's dress. Just like that, the two of them walked out of the room and went down the stairs, toward the Lawrence family's main hall. From afar, they looked as beautiful as a painting, which made Monica suddenly stop in her tracks. She felt that Jeannie was really blessed, and knowing that even made her eyes a little red. After all, she was easily touched by such a beautiful scene. "Let's go," Finn reminded her as he stood beside her. Monica did not bat an eyelid at him before she followed Jean and the others. At the entrance of the Lawrence family's manor, Monica was taken aback to see the row of luxury cars lined on the street in front of her. Chapter 334. The Wedding. Jean, my heart. Moreover, the cars were filled with flowers, ranging from roses to seasonal peonies. It was the epitome of romantic gesture. The sight blew Monica away, and she stared with her mouth agape. There are 50 types of flowers, Finn said. Monica was stunned. How much should they cost? She knew Fourth Master Swan was wealthy, but that was a reminder of just how rich he was. In the meantime, the two of them got into the car, which was behind the wedding car. What else is he giving her as a gift? Now, Monica was very curious. Well, as far as I know, he has transferred her 8% of the Swan's original shares, Finn said. At that moment, she could not help but glance at the line of cars filled with flowers behind her. She thought Fourth Master Swan was flaunting his wealth. After all, the Swans had a lot of money that he could flaunt as he pleased, but this was on a whole other level. She did not expect that. The fourth master of the Swans family would be willing to spend so much to marry Jean. In fact, not many wealthy people would be willing to go to such an extent for a wedding. However, Fourth Master Swan had broken the record for it being the grandest and most unique wedding. It was clear that he had put a lot of effort into it. Monica suddenly smiled and said, I didn't expect that the fourth master would treat Jeannie so well. At that moment, she was really certain of that. Otherwise, why would he have put in so much effort just to get married? Every single thing, down to all the details, was perfect. Finn did not echo her sentiments. Anyone who was not blind could tell how good Fourth Master Swan was to Jean. Monica seemed to be so emotional for a second. She couldn't help but say, how could Fourth Master Swan do so much in just 4 days? With money, none of this is difficult, Finn said straightforwardly. That was true, but coming up with all these ideas is not easy. As for ideas, who knew how long he had thought about them? In the car, Monica kept sighing. She was really impressed by Fourth Master Swan. On the other hand, the newlywed couple in the car in front was silent. Knox was sitting with them in the passenger seat. In the long and expensive Lincoln, only Edward and Jean were sitting inside, looking at each other. Suddenly, there was silence. You can pretend I don't exist and kiss or hug each other. It's fine by me, Knox suddenly said. Jean could not help but laugh. Although she was a little shy, Knox's words had made the atmosphere between the two of them not so awkward. Fourth Master, Jean said. Yes, I'm sorry to have made you spend so much money. At that, Edward frowned. I like it very much, Jean suddenly said. The corners of Edward's lips curled up into a smile. He said, what do you like? I like them all. Be more specific. The gown, accessories, and bracelets, Jean said. She had never been fortunate enough to wear such expensive things in her life before. As it was her first time wearing them, she felt she looked very beautiful, so beautiful that she found herself somewhat stunning. Chapter 335. The Wedding. Jean, my heart. She was also looking at Fourth Master Swan at that moment. Today, he was in a white suit. The workmanship and embroidery were exquisite, but the most important thing was that they matched hers. It was also her first time seeing him wearing full white, which suited him very well. In fact, it made him look even more handsome and his already eye-catching presence a little more ostentatious. She did not know how to describe his good looks. However, she felt that, at that moment, Edward was the most handsome man in the country. If you like it, you should express it. Knox, who was in the passenger seat, suddenly teased. The two people, who were having a moment, were disturbed again. Knox did it on purpose as he found the two too reserved. To be honest, any man would want to sleep with Jean tonight, especially with her get-up today. She looked graceful and elegant, dignified and beautiful, with a hint of charm that made men want to pounce on her. He did not know how Fourth Master Swan could be so patient. If it were him, he might have started the moment he got into the car.
Yes, it was inappropriate for children, so he could not say much. After all, that brat George was still around.
He had stayed by Jean's side quietly the entire time, and at that moment, he was also sitting beside Jean without saying much. The atmosphere in the car was unusually quiet. Jean glanced at Knox, who pretended not to see her. Edward Said, Ms. Lawrence, don't move. Huh? Jean was stunned. Was the makeup on her face smudged? Suddenly, Edward leaned in toward her. As his face got closer, Jean's heart began to race. It seemed especially easy today for her heartbeat to accelerate.
The next second, she felt Fourth Master Swan's kiss on her lips, and at that moment, her heartbeat was pounding. However, George was still around. Putting aside Monica's prank just now, which was mostly for fun, this was not. Still, her body refused to listen to her commands, not allowing her to dodge or push away.
In fact, the moment Edward leaned in toward Jean, his other hand covered Jean's eyes, and he kissed Jean's soft lips without holding back. Knox took a look behind him and then turned back, placing his hand on the back of his head. Fourth Master Swan had really fallen in love with Jean. He did not know if it was true, but it was worth celebrating. The car soon arrived at the Swan family's manor, where many people had gathered. Compared to Eden's and Jasmine's wedding, there were a lot more people. As soon as the wedding car arrived at Universe Garden, Edward pulled Jean out of the car, and George followed by their side. Edward whispered in Jean's ear, "Let's greet the old master first." Jean nodded and walked in while holding George's hand. George was a little unhappy. After all, for the entire morning, that was the only time she held his hand. He just knew that Fourth Master Swan was going to snatch his mother away from him. With that, the two of them walked into the main hall, where Old Master Swan was sitting in the middle seat. However, what surprised them was the other person sitting beside him. Jean's eyes paused for a moment. Having noticed it, Edward tightened his grip on Jean's hand as if he was giving her something to lean on and telling her not to be nervous. Edward walked in front of them and said to the person beside his father, "Mr. President." Indeed, that was the president of Harkin, Warren Sanders. She did not expect that the president would show up at their wedding. As she bit her lips and told herself to relax, she said respectfully, "Mr. President. Both of you don't need to be so polite. Today, I am here as a guest to attend your wedding banquet. Just be casual," the president said, and his tone sounded very amiable. However, Jean knew very well that he could hold his current position so well not because he seemed amiable. "Yes," Edward replied. The president nodded and turned his head to look at Jean, who met his gaze. "Your reputation really does precede you, Ms. Lawrence. You are indeed different from the rest, and it's no wonder Fourth Master Swan chose you. I don't think even my daughter is outstanding enough compared to you," the president said in a tone that was neither angry nor friendly. In fact, trying to figure out a leader's thoughts was not easy at all, especially when he was one they were unacquainted with and leading the country. However, since the president mentioned Melody and Fourth Master Swan in a situation like that, he was definitely hung up over the matter. If he did not explain himself at that moment, he would definitely come across as rude. Jean smiled. "President, you flatter me. Actually, the third princess is outstanding. In fact, she's too outstanding for Edward to be worthy of her." It was obvious that she was pandering to the president. On one hand, she affirmed Melody's excellence, and on the other, she also explained the reason why Fourth Master Swan did not get together with Ms. Sanders. It was because Fourth Master Swan was not worthy of her. That way, it would give the president a good excuse. By the looks of the president's reaction, he did not seem to reject that answer. He nodded and suddenly called out to his personal guard, "Leon." The guard named Leon stood respectfully beside the president. "I'm just here to congratulate Old Master Swan. It's getting late, and I still have a lot of official business to attend to, so I'll take my leave now." "I'll send you off." Zachary quickly went forward. "No need," the president waved his hand and stopped him. After that, he left immediately. Everyone's gaze was on him. In fact, except for on the television, that was also the first time Jean had seen the president in person. The corners of her mouth curled into a cold smile, a very cold one. Chapter 336. Ceremony ended. What about the marriage of convenience we agreed upon? After the president left under everyone's gaze, the atmosphere in the hall in Universe Garden returned to normal. Edward and Jean greeted Old Master Swan before the wedding ceremony officially began. At that moment, all the swans, young and old, started to show up in the hall once the president left. To be precise, everyone was already waiting for Edward and Jean to arrive for the wedding ceremony to start before the president came. However, the sudden arrival of the president had prompted Old Master Swan to clear the main hall out of respect for the president. Hence, it was only natural for the others to appear and take their seats as soon as the president left. Everyone looked at the couple in the main hall, dressed in white and down the aisle. Among the Swan's guests, Eden and Jasmine were both present. Jasmine was really jealous, and it was visible on her face. It was not that she did not want to pretend to be friendly and kind, but she just could not keep up the act. She thought Jean's wedding would only be a formality. Never did she imagine that it would be so grand.
Edward picking Jean up with rows of cars filled with various types of flowers had become the hottest topic of the day, making all the women in the Harkin jealous of Jean.
She could have accepted it if it was just an expensive wedding. In any case, the Swan's family was rich, so spending a lot of money on a wedding was not a big deal. However, she could take the fact that they spent so much money and put so much effort into the wedding. At the thought of her wedding with Eden back then, it was nothing compared to this. Even on their wedding day, Jean and Fourth Master Swan snatched the limelight from her and Eden's wedding by being on the trending topics. She gritted her teeth as she looked at Jean in the luxurious, noble-looking designer gown, and her heart twisted in jealousy. Wearing that gown was a symbol of status. She really wanted to lie to herself, but she could not convince herself that Fourth Master Swan did not love Jean. If he did not love her, the wedding would not be so grand, and he would not have put in so much effort. How did Jean seduce Fourth Master Swan? How could she? Jasmine tried her best to look normal and keep a smile on her face. However, Jasmine was not the only one trying to suppress her emotions. The man beside her, Eden, was at his limit, trying to hide his emotions. For today's wedding, Eden was in charge of greeting the guests at the Swan family's manor, so he did not go along with picking Jean up. If he had not seen the news of Edward picking Jean up with rows of cars filled with flowers, he would not have known that his fourth uncle went to such an extent to marry Jean. In fact, there had never been a wedding in their family's history that was of the scale of his fourth uncle's today. He thought it would just be a simple ceremony for such an abrupt wedding. He had even thought of how to ridicule Jean for thinking too highly of herself. Now, he secretly gritted his teeth and looked fiercely at Jean. All done up for the wedding in the luxurious designer gown, she looked shockingly beautiful. Even though he was a distance away from her, she caught his eye as soon as his fourth uncle led her into Universe Garden. He clenched his fists unconsciously. The woman should have been his. She should have belonged to him. Yet now, he just watched as she, shyly and charmingly, stood by his fourth uncle's side. No, he could not let go just like that. He suppressed the anger in him and looked at the couple, who were down the aisle, saying their vows. George was also standing by Jean's side obediently. Even though he did not speak much throughout the ceremony and was clearly not in a good mood, he would do whatever was asked of him in the end. The groomsmen and bridesmaid handed Jean and Edward each a ring. Jean. Edward slipped the ring on Jean's finger. Then, it was Jean's turn to put the ring on Edward's finger before they both smiled and kissed each other. After that, they turned to Zachary, whom Jean greeted, Dad. That was right. She had to change the way she addressed him, and it was very awkward. From her grandfather at the beginning, to her uncle, to her dad? The corners of her mouth curled up into a smile. She looked very virtuous and virtuous. Zachary responded, held the newlyweds' hands, and said, I wish you both a long and happy marriage. Chapter 337. Ceremony ended. What about the marriage of convenience we agreed upon? Thank you, Dad, Jean replied. Then, she said softly to George, George, greet your grandpa. George looked up at Zachary and said obediently, Grandpa. Only then did Zachary notice George and size him up. He glanced at the boy a few times, but then he did it again. He found it somewhat puzzling. Eventually, he asked George, How old are you? 6 years old, George replied. The same age as Quentin, Zachary muttered. George just looked at Zachary, who did not say much either, and took a box that Wade had delivered. Inside the box was a locket. It did not look like it was made of gold, but it looked a little aged. Zachary held it in his hand, and when he stood up from his seat, everyone looked at him respectfully, watching his every action. He bent down and personally put the locket on George's neck. He said, I hope this will keep you safe. Jean was, in fact, a little surprised. She had never thought old Master Swan would prepare a gift for George. The gift may not be expensive, but for old Master Swan to go through the hassle to prepare it, it was considered valuable. By then, Jasmine could no longer hide the jealousy in her eyes. Quentin's mother, Grace Hamlin, muttered unhappily at the side. The old master has never given that to Quentin. It was not just Quentin. The Swans had many children and grandchildren, but none had ever received them. Jasmine secretly gritted her teeth, thinking she had to get pregnant with Eden's child right away. She had to have a son to prove her value so that she could undermine Jean in the Swans. George, say thank you. Edward reminded him. Jean was still so stunned from being surprised that she forgot to remind George. However, when she heard Edward's tone, although it was just a simple sentence, it made her feel as though Fourth Master Swan had treated George as his own son, and that was why it sounded so natural. Her heart did a weird flip. George said obediently, Thank you, Grandpa. With that, Zachary nodded and returned to his seat. Then, he said, All right. Thank you, Father. Just as she was about to move, Fourth Master Swan held her hand to support her. In response, Jean turned to look at Edward and smiled at him to express her gratitude. Her gown was too exquisite, which had forced her to move a little slower, and Fourth Master Swan was obviously taking care of her by holding her hand. When Edward saw the sweet smile on her face, His lips also curled into a big and affectionate smile. "I've never seen fourth Master Swan smile like this before," said the third old Master Swan, Richard, in a low voice. At first, he had thought that such an abrupt wedding would definitely be a marriage of convenience. After all, fourth Master Swan was close to 30 years old. Although the old master had never pushed him to get married, he was not young, and it was only natural for him to get married. From the looks of it now, it seemed they were making presumptuous assumptions. In fact, the reason why the fourth Master Swan had never gotten married before was that he had not found the right person and not because he refused to get married. Now, he was getting married because they had found the right person. It was only logical. With Edward holding Jean's hand, the newlyweds walked out of the Universe Garden and onto a large lawn in the Swans family's manor. A beautiful wedding reception had been planned out on the lawn, with a huge tent built in the center. As they walked in on the white carpet, the inside was grand and magnificently decorated, with chandeliers, sculptures in the background, and tons of white flowers. Jean was shocked. How did fourth Master Swan prepare all those in just 4 days?
She could not help but look at the man beside her. Feeling her gaze, Edward turned around, bent down by her ear, and whispered, "You're worth it."
Worth what? Did he do all of that for her? Jean felt as if her heart was struck, and it beat even faster. Before she could speak, she saw Edward let go of her. He said, "See you in a while." After that, he followed the staff and walked to the other side. At that moment, Jean also had many staff members surrounding her, guiding her to walk to the other side of the tent.
Chapter 338. Ceremony ended. What about the marriage of convenience we agreed upon?
Since they walked in from a rather remote corner, the guests, who were moving around, did not notice them. However, they could also be doing so because they were deliberately trying to cover up a surprise that would follow.
Just like that, Jean was guided into a white veil in the middle of the tent. Through the white veil, one could faintly see Jean's beautiful figure. Although it was not very clear, it attracted everyone's attention at that moment. Monica was also sent there. However, she was so exhilarated by today's wedding that she could not speak clearly.
"Jeannie, I've grown up seeing countless rich people and attending countless weddings, but I've seen one of this scale before. You've become the women's public enemy #1, Monica said indignantly. Jean had instantly killed all the women in Harkin. Monica was not making it up. The hashtag, public enemy #1, Jean, really was trending. Jean chuckled. She, too, did not think fourth Master Swan would put so much effort into the wedding.
Rows of cars filled with flowers. Monica muttered, "Just those words alone sound so romantic. Fourth Master Swan, that B***starred, looks so cold and aloof. I can't believe he puts so much effort into doing something. It's so touching."
"What do you mean by rows of cars filled with flowers?" Jean was surprised. "Don't you know?" Monica stared at Jean with wide eyes.
Jean really did not. "I won't tell you even if you don't know. I don't want you to get all smug," Monica said on purpose.
Jean was speechless, thinking how much of an idiot Monica still was. Just then, a male voice suddenly sounded, "The time has come." Jean's heart skipped a beat. Monica was even more excited than Jean. "It's starting, it's starting." Jean tried her best to contain her racing heart. She looked through the veil and saw Edward at the end of the white carpet. In his white suit, his tall figure and outstanding looks instantly attracted everyone's attention. Monica was so starstruck that she almost drooled. The wedding reception had officially begun.
Alexander had also appeared within the veil. He was at a loss for words, probably because of how big of a scale the wedding today was. After all, who would have thought that such a last-minute wedding would be so grand? Nevertheless, Jean still took the initiative to hold Alexander's arm. After all, it was just a reception, and there was no need for either of them to express their feelings. The wedding reception was not like the usual wedding ceremony. The moment the reception started, Edward began walking on the white carpet until his tall body stopped in front of her. Then, the veil slowly opened, revealing Jean and Edward to each other. There was a smile on Edward's face. From the side, Monica watched with infatuation. To be honest, she had never seen fourth Master Swan smile like that before. What was more, he had been smiling like that all day, and his smile was infectious. She watched as fourth Master Swan reached his long, slender fingers out to Jean. Jean stared at his hand and suddenly began to feel nervous while Alexander placed her hand on Edward's. According to the plan, Alexander said, "I'll hand my daughter over to you." "Thank you, Dad." Edward was extremely respectful. Alexander nodded, displaying an image of a loving father.
Edward held Jean's hand and walked on the white carpet. The lights in the beautifully decorated tent shone on them, bathing their bodies in a faint layer of white halo. At the same time, Jean's body glittered as the fine diamonds on her gown reflected the light. They were the focus of everyone's attention. At that moment, it even felt like they were the only two people left in the world. The others were just floating clouds. With each step they took on the white carpet, gentle music accompanied in the background. In the air above the hall, countless red petals were fluttering in the air.
The romantic scene made everyone hold their breaths as if breathing too heavily would destroy its beauty. For a moment, everything was quiet.
Jean was so nervous that her palms were sweating. However, she could also feel the wetness in the palm of the man, who had always been calm and collected in any situation. Chapter 339. Ceremony ended. What about the marriage of convenience we agreed upon? Did that mean Fourth Master Swan was also nervous? Suddenly, she did not find him as high and mighty as she thought he was.
Then, the two of them arrived at a stage at the end of the tent, where there was a 5-tiered cake and glasses of champagne on a round table. In front of the stage, Zachary and Alexander were sitting at the bride and groom's table. As for Jennifer, she had no right to sit there. After all, she was not Jean's biological mother. At that moment, the expression on Jennifer, who was sitting at another table, was ashen.
She was already raging at how grand the wedding today was, and now she was not allowed to sit at the bride and groom's table? Nevertheless, she endured it. On the stage, Edward and Jean held the knife together and cut the cake slowly. After that, they each picked up a glass of champagne and made a toast to everyone present. Edward held Jean's hand and said, "We want to thank everyone for being here, here's to you." At that moment, someone below whispered, "Have you noticed how the Fourth Master takes such good care of Jean? Every time she moves, the Fourth Master will hold Jean's hand unconsciously as if he's afraid she'll fall. He is so considerate." I did notice that. I also realized that the Fourth Master has been smiling all day. Although I've rarely seen the Fourth Master growing up, I don't think I've ever seen him smile. It's true love. The people down the stage were filled with envy. That was when the MC said, "Now, it's time for the bride and groom to share their first dance." Edward's gaze was only on Jean. As they looked into each other's eyes, they did not put their hands on each other immediately as if there was a tacit understanding between them. It was only after a while that Edward sighed, "Ms. Lawrence, from now on, you will be mine." Jean's heart raced, and it had been racing all day. She was afraid that if it continued to pound, she might have a heart attack. He said, "Ms. Lawrence, are you mentally prepared?" Jean smiled and said, "What about you?" Edward replied, "I have waited for you for 1,000 years." Jean looked at him and saw him put his hand on her waist. Then, she, too, put one hand on his shoulder and another holding his. At that moment, white petals rained from above, fluttering all around them. The entire tent erupted in never-ending applause, and some people even teared up. Although there was no romantic song to accompany the scene and stir up people's emotions, it was extremely touching. On the other hand, Monica was already ugly crying. Watching the scene of Fourth Master Swan and Jean exchanging that conversation and putting their hands on each other made her so emotional that tears streamed down her face. She just could not control herself. Just then, a napkin suddenly appeared in front of her. Monica turned her head, only to see Finn, who said, "Wipe it off. You've ruined your makeup." "Is it ruined?" Monica was a little nervous. Finn smiled. Monica hurriedly took the napkin and carefully wiped the corner of her eyes for a while. However, the more she wiped, the more smudged it became. Finn could not bear to watch any longer. He said, "Don't move." Monica frowned as Finn took out another napkin and lowered her head. With her head lowered, he looked at the black mark at the corner of her eyes and carefully wiped it for her. His eyes were fixed on her black spot, and his touch was neither light nor heavy. Monica pursed her lips. Seeing Finn's sudden action, she found it somewhat unbelievable as Finn was not kind-hearted.
Just as her thoughts were wavering, "Monica," a familiar voice suddenly sounded behind her. It was that voice, and it prompted Monica to suddenly take a few steps back, clearly wanting to keep her distance from Finn.
The napkin that Finn was holding in his hand froze midair. Looking at her, he said, "Let the makeup artist handle it later." He lowered his arm quietly before turning his head around and averting her gaze. By then, the wedding reception had ended, and all the lights in the tent lit up. Edward and Jean had left the scene already. Monica chatted with Michael for a while. However, since many people were around, they still had to be mindful. Hence, Monica chatted with Michael for a while before leaving with the staff. Chapter 340. Ceremony ended. What about the marriage of convenience we agreed upon? After she left, Michael looked at Finn, who looked back at him. Just like that, the two of them looked at each other coldly. However, no one said a word in the end. Even as Michael left, Finn remained silent. At that moment, in the dressing room, Jean and Monica were both changing out of their gowns. Jean's gown was too exquisite for her to wear for a day, so she decided to change out of it. It took her at least half an hour to change out of it, but fortunately, she took them off. If she wore it for the rest of the night, she was not sure if she could take it off herself at the end of the day. After taking off her gown, Jean changed into a simple but well-made dress. Although she did not get it tailor-made, it fit her really well. At the same time, Monica had also changed into a pink dress. Both of their dresses were beautiful in their own way. Jean's dress was glamorous and added a charm to her presence, while Monica's dress was elegant. As the staff changed Jean's hair and makeup, they also explained the origins of the dress to Jean. They said a lot, but Monica only thought of one word: extravagant. It was simply too bold, but Jean liked it, and she liked domineering men like Fourth Master Swan. They were all having a good time in the dressing room until suddenly, someone knocked on the door. A staff member walked toward Jean respectfully. "Ms. Lawrence, someone named Kingsley is looking for you." The smile on Jean's face instantly froze. However, Monica did not notice that. All she heard were the words, "Kingsley," and appeared exceptionally excited. She quickly said, "Let him in." The staff member hurriedly went to the door and invited Kingsley in. Kingsley walked into the dressing room with Lucy following beside him. Jean pursed her lips at the sight of them. Then, she said, "Please can we have the room to ourselves?"
The staff members quickly put down the work in their hands and left.
Just as Monica looked at Kingsley excitedly and was about to greet him, she heard Jean say, "You too, Monica." Monica frowned. "Please," Jean said again. Although Monica was a little unhappy, seeing that Jean was very serious about it, she got up and left. In the room, only the three of them remained. There was a moment of silence before Jean said, "Why are you here? Fourth Master Swan sent me the invitation." Jean froze. "I received it yesterday," Kingsley said bluntly. Jean did not say anything. It was not a big deal anyway. "Even if he didn't send me an invitation, I would come," Kingsley said. "Is that so?" Jean smiled. "I want to watch you get married." Jean's throat moved. In fact, she was not so indifferent to it. Even if the wedding was an order from him, she had no choice but to carry it out. "Fourth Master Swan treats you quite well, I see," Kingsley suddenly said. At that, Jean looked at him. Today's wedding was very grand. Kingsley's tone was very light, but it was clear that he approved. However, Jean did not answer him because she did not know how to. She did not even know what Kingsley meant by those words. "Other than coming to see you get married, I have something else to tell you in person." Kingsley kept looking straight at Jean. Jean knew that would be the reason why he came today. "Don't get your emotions involved." Kingsley made sure to enunciate each word. Jean's eyes narrowed. "I mean, don't get your emotions involved with Fourth Master Swan," Kingsley reminded her. Jean smiled, and her smile was a little sarcastic. "Do you think feelings can be manipulated at will?"
Kingsley suddenly fell silent for a while. Then, he said, "Have you fallen in love with him?"
Jean's heart skipped a beat, and she pursed her lips, not answering. "You can't fall in love with him." Kingsley did not seem to be expecting an answer from Jean either. With an indifferent tone, he told her, "This is an order." As a professional killer, an order was everything, and it had to be carried out unconditionally. "Yes," Jean said respectfully. Since it was an order, she could only agree to it. Kingsley looked at Jean silently for a while as if he had something to say. However, he chose to keep it to himself in the end. As he turned around, he said, "Congratulations on your wedding." Jean wished she could strangle Kingsley to death. With that, Kingsley left with Lucy, who turned around and smiled at Jean on her way out. Jean smiled back while she watched Kingsley and Lucy leave. At the door, Monica was waiting unhappily. When she saw Kingsley come out, she could not help but call out to him, "Kingsley, do you still remember me?" Chapter 341. Ceremony ended. "What about the marriage of convenience we agreed upon?" "Of course, Ms. Cardellini. We agreed to have dinner together last time, but something got in the way. After that, I heard you left Southampton City. Do you want to set a date and have dinner together?" Monica took the initiative to ask. Kingsley smiled. "I might have to disappoint you again." "Are you busy again?" Monica was upset. "In short, I owe you a meal," Kingsley promised. "Okay," Monica nodded. She could not make things difficult for him anyway. Hence, she watched as Kingsley left with the beautiful woman next to him in a dashing manner. When he left, there was another man next to him. The group walked out of the cloakroom and left the venue immediately. There was no need to stay after the wedding reception. The three of them sat in the limousine, which filled with silence. Lucy knew that Kingsley was in a bad mood. In fact, Kingsley was not as indifferent as he appeared to be about having Jean marry Fourth Master Swan. She pursed her lips. It all seemed to have started because of her. If she had not let Jean go, however, she had a feeling that Jean might be able to change a lot of destinies. Something flashed in her eyes, and she said to the front row, "Jeannie looked beautiful today." The man in the front row did not reply. "You should go and greet her face to face." There was still no response from the front row, so Lucy kept her mouth shut after. Just like that, the car left Southampton City. In the Swans family's manor, Edward was also changing out of his suit with Knox accompanying him. While waiting for him, Knox was on his phone as if he was looking at something. Once Edward had changed into a new set of clothes, he told the staff to go out first. Knox opened his mouth and said, "Kingsley came." "Yes, he saw the man too." "But he has left." Edward nodded. "However, this person, Kingsley." Knox dragged out the word. "He's a hard one to figure out." "What did you find?" Edward's eyes narrowed. "Do you know this person?" Knox held his phone in front of Edward. Edward took a look and said, "K01. "Yes. He's the #1 assassin in the world and the #1 underground boxer," Knox said. "It seems like he's one of Kingsley's men." "Kingsley has a powerful backing. I suspect Kingsley is related to the Mafia in Delta Island," Knox speculated. "Keep the investigation going," Edward replied. "Okay." Knox put down his phone. However, as soon as he put down his phone, he could not help but say, "Let me show you another photo." Edward frowned. Knox pulled out another photo on his phone and said somewhat casually, "I think our people are quite talented in taking photos." Some of these expressions were really well captured. Edward took Knox's phone, only to see it was still a photo of K01. In the photo, K01 was looking in a direction. It was obvious who he was looking at, and there was a hint of emotion in his eyes. There would be nothing strange about it if it were an ordinary person, but for a cold-blooded professional killer, it was unheard of. Knox said, "I observed him for a while and noticed the direction he was looking at was where you and Jean were standing. If he doesn't have feelings for you, then it is." Knox wanted to say something but stopped. Edward glanced at Knox. In the end, Knox still said bravely, "He just has feelings for your wife." Edward then returned the phone to Knox with a very indifferent expression. As Knox took the phone in his hand, he said with a smile, "Fourth Master Swan, you have quite a few love rivals." Edward ignored him, so Knox added, "And they all have quite a powerful backing." However, Edward still refused to respond. Instead, he looked into the mirror and fixed his clothes, seemingly unfazed. "You have to keep a close eye on your wife. You don't have to worry about my matters," Edward said indifferently. Knox pursed his lips. Being too confident was not necessarily a good thing. Even though he could afford to be confident, he had a feeling that Ms. Lawrence was not an easy person to deal with. Once Edward had fixed himself up, he walked out of the changing room, and at the same time, Jean also walked out of the dressing room. As both rooms were opposite one another, the two of them bumped into each other unexpectedly. Edward walked straight toward Jean, who was wearing a small smile on her face, and held her hand, guiding her toward the hall. Knox looked at them. He had to admit that he had never seen such a well-matched couple. "What? Are you jealous?" Monica teased on purpose. A look of contempt appeared on Knox's face. "Do you think I'm the kind of person who would give up everything for one person?" Chapter 342. Ceremony ended. "What about the marriage of convenience we agreed upon?" SC*MBAG. Monica said that and left. Furious, Knox thought, "I treat everyone equally, what a shallow woman." At the wedding reception, Edward brought Jean and gave a toast to them, one by one. In Harkin's tradition, the newlyweds had to thank all the guests, regardless of their status. Jean only found out through the toast that all of Harkin's influential people were here. Putting aside the 12 families, even the president was here, but because it was not appropriate for him to be seen in public, he left early. However, Chris Sanders, who represented the Sanders, the well-respected Liam and his family, many high-ranking officials, and many businessmen were present. West was also among those people. When Edward and Jean were giving toasts, he quickly went up to congratulate them. While he was congratulating them, he did not forget to joke around. "There is no hope for my son." Jean smiled. "Fortunately, I've detained that kid overseas. If he were here, he might stir up trouble." West lamented. Anyway, congratulations to the two of you. Thank you, Godfather. Jean smiled. Fourth Master Swan also said respectfully, thank you, Godfather. Jean just could not describe the feeling. She did not know why, but hearing Fourth Master Swan addressing someone the same way as she made her feel like they were now one entity, and she found it unbelievable.
The wedding reception lasted for a very long time. The ceremony started at noon and ended with the wedding reception at night. After a day of excitement, everyone was tired. Edward and Jean sent off each and every one of the guests until only some of their closest family and friends were left. Seeing everyone had left, Monica immediately took off her high heels as they really hurt. She held the high heels in her hands without care for her image and said, "It's finally over."
Jean was also relieved. Getting married was really tiring. It was not physical torture, as that kind of intensity was nothing for her, but it drained her of her energy. All the laughing and socializing had made her face stiff.
"If there's nothing else, I'll head off now." Monica was really exhausted. "Okay." Jean nodded. "I'm sure you can't wait for us to leave as soon as possible." Monica flashed Jean an evil grin.
Jean was speechless. She simply thought Monica would be really tired after accompanying her for the whole day. "I don't want to disturb your wedding night." Jean almost forgot about that, and her body tensed up. Monica turned to look at Edward. "Fourth Master, you have to go easy on her." In response, Edward glanced at Monica and said, "Okay. Okay, in that case, goodbye." Monica picked up her high heels and left. "We'll head off now." Finn smiled. "Okay." With that, Finn and Monica left together. Seeing there was nothing else to do, Knox left too. By then, the rest of the Snows also left one after the other until no one else was around.
Other than the servants at home who had started cleaning up the place, only the two of them were left.
The two of them suddenly fell silent. "Ms. Lawrence, it's time to go back to the room." Jean's heart tightened. She felt inexplicably nervous. Then, Edward suddenly bent down, and Jean instinctively hugged Fourth Master Swan's neck in shock. With a smile on his face, Edward carried Jean and strode into Bamboo Garden, which was extremely quiet tonight. Even Teddy was not there. It was as if the place was suddenly cleared out. Only then did it hit Jean, and she became a little agitated. "Where's George?" Edward smiled again, but this time, his smile looked like he had committed a crime. "You're only thinking about your son now." She had handed George over to Teddy because of all the wedding ceremonies and receptions she had to attend. However, now that Teddy was not around, where was George? "George will be staying at Universe Garden tonight," Edward suddenly said. "What?" Jean was shocked. "Did he send George to Old Master Swan?" "My dad is quite lonely by himself, so George can accompany him. George is not used to talking to strangers or staying in a stranger's place." "My dad is not a stranger, Fourth Master Swan." "Shish." At that moment, Edward had already carried her into his room. The room, which had always been black and white, had been decorated with more pastel colors. Even the big bed was white and covered with white rose petals. As Edward placed her on his bed, the seductiveness of the rose under the night light made her even more attractive. At that moment, Edward stared at her in a daze. A little numb from the man's stare, Jean said, "I'm talking about George." "Stop fooling around, Edward Said." She felt his warm breath on her cheek and furrowed her brows. "Tomorrow morning, I'll ask Teddy to bring him back." Jean bit her lip. He should have discussed it with her first. She could totally imagine how upset George was at that moment. But tonight, Edward leaned closer to Jean's ear. Jean's body went numb. "No one can disturb us." Jean started to feel nervous, so nervous that her heart was about to beat out of her chest. She then felt Fourth Master Swan's lips on her earlobe. "Fourth Master." Jean stopped him. Edward stopped. "Isn't this a marriage of convenience?" "So." Edward raised her eyebrows.
"Don't do it." Jean's voice was very soft. "Ms. Lawrence." When Edward saw that, her magnetic voice sounded a little sexy. "Isn't a marriage of convenience another term for friends with benefits?" EU. Chapter 343. Madam, Mrs., Wifey, or Jeannie.
"Isn't a marriage of convenience the same as friends with benefits?" Edward's deep voice echoed in Jean's ears. That was when she felt his lips nibbling on her ear. Her body shuddered. She could feel Fourth Master Swan's determination, and she had a feeling that she could not escape him tonight. In fact, since she had chosen to return and agreed to marry Fourth Master Swan, she had already expected to face a moment like that. However, now that it was really happening to her, she still felt. She, too, did not know why she was holding back, but she squirmed as she silently resisted. Then, she said, "Fourth master, can I take a bath?" It was useless to resist because there was no way to refuse. In that case, he ought to let her be comfortable. The man, who was kissing her, stopped in pain and said, "I'll help you." "No," Jean pushed him away. "I can do it myself." Fourth Master Swan's throat moved. As their eyes met, Fourth Master Swan's Adam's apple bobbed up and down. She could tell that he was trying to hold himself back. Once he got up from her body, Jean was free. With her newfound freedom, she sped to the bathroom as if trying to flee. Edward just stared at Jean's back. His burning gaze was on her the entire time until suddenly, he smiled. He got up, thinking he would also take a shower. Hence, he left his room and went to the room next door to take a shower.
When he came out of the shower, he was just wearing a white bathrobe.
However, back in his room, the sound of water splashing could still be heard, which meant that she was still taking a shower. Edward smiled again, albeit faint, thinking, "Ms. Lawrence always knows how to torture me." Hence, he stood up and walked toward the balcony on that cool autumn night. Having entered autumn, the weather in Southampton City was starting to get cooler. The night wind blew past him, and the coolness relaxed his tense body.
Just like that, he stood on the balcony outside, unaware of how much time had passed. It felt like he had waited a very long time, as long as a century, until he finally heard some movements in the room. Jean had really taken a long shower, trying to delay time because she knew very well that when she walked out of the bathroom, what she had to face next was their first night together as husband and wife.
In fact, she had stopped worrying and overthinking about a thing for a long time now, but tonight. She admitted that she had started to hesitate, she was even a little afraid. Yet, on second thought, how ridiculous was it for her to be reserved at that point? That was why she walked out of the bathroom in the end. Just like Fourth Master Swan, she wore a white bathrobe and a piece of clothing that could be easily removed. When she walked out of the bathroom, she did not see Fourth Master Swan. However, while she looked for him, she saw a tall but lonely figure standing on the balcony outside under the moonlight. She was stunned for a second. She did not know why the powerful Fourth Master Swan made her feel that he was so lonely.
It was as if he was the only person in his world, or to be precise, had always been the only one.
She bit her lip and tried to compose herself. She was probably feeling guilty because she rejected him earlier. At that, she took a deep breath. She was the one who proposed the marriage and wanted to marry him. Yet now, she was refusing to share a room with him. What was she trying to tell him?
Therefore, she chose to walk toward the balcony. The man standing there stiffened for a second, but on the surface, he looked unbothered.
He did not show any emotion, so no one could see his reaction. Fourth Master. Jean stood beside him and looked in the direction he was looking at. In the dark bamboo garden, she could not make out anything other than a few scattered lamps. Edward responded, "I'm sorry for making you wait so long," she said. It was a hint. No, it was a clear indication. Edward turned to look at her. Without her high heels, Jean felt extremely petite in front of Fourth Master Swan. It meant that, from Fourth Master Swan's vision, she was probably a dwarf. She also turned her head and met Fourth Master Swan's eyes. Just like that, the two of them looked at each other as the wind breezed past on that quiet night. There was a moment of silence. "Ms. Lawrence, have you thought about it?" Eventually, Fourth Master Swan's thin lips moved as he asked her the question.
She could not hear any emotion in his tone. It was as if it was just a simple and direct sentence.
Chapter 344. Madam, Mrs., Wifey, or Jeannie. Upon hearing that sentence, Jen fell silent again. "Have you thought it through?" It seemed like there was more to the phrase than asking her whether she was ready to spend the night with him as his wife. To her, it felt like it was mixed with a myriad of emotions. She did not know how to answer. In the meantime, he watched as she remained silent and smiled. It was just a gentle smile, so she could not see through his emotions. He communicated his needs very clearly earlier, but now she found him confusing. Just then, she heard him say, "If you're not, you can think it through again." Jean looked at him, who turned around and left after saying that. He had clearly given up. Deep down, she felt inexplicably guilty. After all, humans were classified as high-level animals probably because they had too many emotions and desires. She bit her lips, and at that moment, her slender little hand grabbed the corner of his shirt. Edward's footsteps halted before he turned around. "Don't go." Edward gulped. She could see that his Adam's apple was really bobbing up and down intensely. "I've thought it through." Those 3 words rang in Edward's ears. That was right. She had indeed thought about being truly married to Fourth Master Swan. However, he fell silent at her answer and looked at her quietly. She did not know if he was suppressing his emotions, but he did not make any move or leave. Jean waited for a long time, so long that it felt like forever. Then, she took 2 steps forward, closing the distance between them. The man in front of her looked at her intently. He watched as she suddenly tiptoed, hugged his neck, and said, "Fourth Master, are you afraid?" That question sounded like she was teasing him, and the smile on the corner of her mouth was very obvious. Under the night sky, she was really like a beautiful rose, blooming so brightly that it aroused something in him. The emotions in Edward's eyes were changing and showing little by little. It proved that the man in front of her could not resist the seduction. She thought, how did he last so many years of abstinence? Not one bit did he look like someone who could abstain from sex. At that moment, she heard his magnetic voice say, "My name is Edward." Huh? Jean frowned. What did he mean by that? Was he delirious from being aroused? "That is the name my parents gave me." While she was trying to figure out what he was trying to say, he said in his low and magnetic voice, "But you can call me Ed." Jean's heart skipped a beat. Ed. Her heart began to race. Such an intimate way of addressing him made her feel an indescribable emotion. She stared at him and at how close his cheeks were to her. Then, she watched his lips press against hers. She did not know if it was because he had been out in the cold for too long, but she found his lips cool before suddenly, a fire-like madness erupted. On the wedding night, every moment was priceless. The next day, the weather was good. The sunlight from the outside shone through the tiny gaps and onto the floor of the room. As the wind blew gently against the curtains, the light on the floor flickered. Jean opened her eyes and quietly looked in the direction of the window, lost in her thoughts. Last night, their first night as husband and wife. Everything seemed to have gone according to plan, but it also felt like a dream. Just like that, she looked out the window without moving for a long time. Everything was peaceful until the person behind her moved a little. He should be awake, she thought. Last night was very tiring. She did, in fact, wake up a little early for some reason, but the man behind her slept very soundly. The sun was now hung high up in the sky. She had never thought that Fourth Master Swan was someone who would sleep in, yet he did. Her body tensed up as she felt someone hugging her from behind. The warm embrace was very natural and intimate. She bit her lips and could feel his head approaching her neck. Then, he whispered in his ear, "Are you awake?" How did he know she was awake when she did not move? Chapter 345. Madam, Mrs., Wife, or Genie? She did not answer, but then she heard him laughing.
What was he laughing at? Was he in such a good mood so early in the morning?
On the contrary, she was not in a good mood because she had insomnia. She knew she was exhausted when even her toes had no strength. However, she just could not fall asleep. Even if she did fall asleep for a while, she would wake up again. Only then did she hear the sound of steady breathing coming from the person behind her. It was clear that he had had a good sleep. Still, she did not speak. The person behind her hugged her a little tighter and said, "Did it hurt?" Jean was stunned. Last night, he added. Jean did not want to recall anything that happened yesterday at all. "Turn around," he called out to her, clearly ordering her.
Jean did not move. She, too, had her stubbornness and pride. "I have many ways to make you."
Before he could finish his sentence, Jean suddenly turned around. She secretly cursed him, beast. Then, she looked at Fourth Master Swan in front of her, at his lazy appearance, his messy hair, his frustratingly good-looking cheeks, and his sexy lips. Her eyes lingered on his lips. "What are you looking at?" He raised his eyebrows. Jean closed her eyes. "I'm not looking at anything." A few deep laughs sounded from beside her. "I don't mind you peeping at me." She was not peeping at him. "Jeannie." He suddenly opened his mouth and called her by her nickname. Jean shuddered. "Can I call you that?" Edward asked her. Now, she was a little stumped. "Didn't you tell me not to call you Ms. Lawrence?" Edward sighed with a chuckle. Ms. Lawrence sounded nice. She was not used to being suddenly called Jeannie. "You don't like it?" Seeing that she did not answer, Edward sighed. "What about Madam?" She was speechless. "Mrs. What was the difference between Mrs. and Madam? Or do you like?" Edward leaned in closer to her as he said, so close that she could feel his warm breath on her cheek. "Or do you like me to call you wifey?" Edward asked very seriously, wanting to know her opinion. However, Jeannie felt as if he was deliberately teasing her. Jean gritted her teeth and said, "Jean will do." She felt more comfortable with him using the name that everyone called her. "In that case, I'll call you Jeannie." In that case, why the hell did he ask her? Are you going to get up, Jeannie? He suddenly changed the topic. The way he said, Jeannie, sounded so natural and nice. There was no feeling of disharmony. Jean suddenly turned around, with her back facing fourth Master Swan. At that moment, she covered her head in the blanket and said, I'm not going to get up. I want to sleep for a while longer. She had insomnia for most of last night, so she wanted to sleep for a while more. It was my fault last night. At that, Jean blushed and thought, who said you could talk about last night's matter? Well, you can sleep for a while more. I'll accompany you. However, she did not want him to accompany her. Jeannie, change your sleeping position. Fourth Master Swan suddenly requested. Jean was unhappy. How was she supposed to change to a different position and fall asleep? Ah! Jean gritted her teeth. It's not safe, Edward whispered in her ear. He was a beast in disguise. No, he was a wolf, a tiger, and a leopard. Left with no choice, she could only sleep facing fourth Master Swan. She closed her eyes and forced herself to sleep again. Initially, her entire body was aching, but she was too lazy to move. Still, for some reason, she could not fall asleep. Her face turned red like a tomato at the thought of everything that happened last night. On the other hand, Edward simply watched as Jean's expression changed from angry to shy. Then, his slender fingers caressed her face. Jean's body stiffened, but she did not open her eyes and pretended to be asleep instead. His kiss landed on her forehead and gently pulled her into his embrace. Jean desperately wanted to protest as she was not used to being hugged like that. However, she knew very well that it was useless to resist. She might even get herself into trouble. Hence, she just lay quietly in fourth Master Swan's embrace, thinking that she would not be able to fall asleep again. In fact, she just wanted to take a nap because last night was very tiring. However, the moment she heard his steady, powerful heartbeat and felt a sense of safety from his embrace, she eventually fell asleep in a daze. When she was asleep, there came the sound of even breathing. Chapter 346. Madam, Mrs., Wife, or Jeannie. The man hugging her did not close his eyes. Instead, he looked at her quietly in his arms like a soft little kitten. The corners of his mouth lifted into a smile, and his eyes were filled with affection. When Jean woke up, she was sure that she had enough sleep. She then tried to turn over, but no matter how hard she tried, she could not move. With a frown, she opened her eyes, only to see fourth Master Swan's handsome face up close. Did he have to put himself so close to her? She was afraid that she, too, would not be able to control herself seeing such a handsome face as soon as she opened her eyes. Are you awake? Fourth Master Swan asked her. At that moment, she was lying on his arm, and the two of them were hugging each other. It was a very intimate position. Something in her eyes moved, and she averted her gaze. That face was so good-looking that it could be so dangerous sometimes. Then, her gaze fell on his neck. Looking at his bobbing Adam's apple, she said, I'm awake. This time, she was really awake, and she also felt very hungry. If you're awake, let's get up, he said. As Jean nodded, she heard him say, I've already been in bed with you for an entire day and night. What did he mean by that? They clearly had sex last night. Fine. If being in bed was what he wanted to call it, so be it. It's 6 p.m. now. What? Jean widened her eyes in disbelief. She had slept for an entire day. It was no wonder she was starving to death. As Edward lifted the blanket, Jean suddenly felt cold and hugged her body. Then, Edward got off the bed and picked Jean up from the bed. Jean was shocked. Edward did not seem to care about clothes.
He directly carried her into the bathroom, where they both washed up, naked. She wished she could complain to him about how uncomfortable she was. Therefore, she washed up as quickly as she could and dashed straight into the cloakroom. She knew many of her clothes were there, so she randomly picked out a set of loose loungewear. Just as she was about to change into it, the door to the cloakroom opened.
Jean immediately used her clothes to shield her body. I've seen it. Edward smiled and began picking what to wear. He was very calm. Jean turned around, and with her back facing fourth Master Swan, she put on her own clothes. However, as soon as she was dressed, she was picked up again. Jean was speechless. She found that men were liars sometimes. Does this hurt? Edward suddenly asked her. In front of her was a huge mirror, and his slender fingers pointed at her collarbone, where a greenish-purple mark was visible. It was a hickey. In fact, there were actually many hickeys on her body. She looked at the innocent-looking man in the mirror. At that moment, fourth Master Swan looked just like the boy next door. He looked so fresh and clean. Compared to the person last night, The difference was like heaven and earth. She said, "It doesn't hurt." She really did not feel any pain.
Even she was surprised to see so many hickeys on her in the mirror. Is that so? Edward did not seem to believe her. Yes, Jean was very sure. Not wanting to argue with the man in front of her, she said, "I'm hungry." She was hungry and wanted to eat. Edward's eyebrows moved. "I'm hungry," Jean repeated herself.
She was starving to death. "Actually, I'm hungry too," Edward sighed. When he said it, he even smiled. "Well then, let's eat together," Jean suggested. However, he still hugged her and refused to let her go. The man smiled again, and he looked so d*mn good when he did. He said, "So you're hungry, Ms. Lawrence?" In her head, she screamed, "Duh." With that, Edward let go of her and held her hand as they walked out of the cloakroom. Jean glanced at his big hand, which held hers all of yesterday to complete an important ceremony in her life. Her heart was pounding a little. She still found it somewhat unbelievable that she had married Fourth Master Swan. For a very long time, at least, they would have to live together. When they went downstairs, Teddy and George were both there. George was sitting on the sofa, watching Peppa Pig on the TV. Jean noticed that George looked like his life was devoid of meaning. George had never watched cartoons. However, at that moment, he was sitting quietly on the sofa, watching it with Teddy, who was enjoying it. The contrasting looks on those two's faces were somewhat funny. Chapter 347. Madam, Mrs., Wife, or Genie. Seeing them come down at that moment, George looked even more displeased. He turned his head arrogantly and ignored them. Jean, too, felt a little guilty because she had not been with George all of yesterday and today. She had even thrown him aside. Therefore, she went over and sat beside George, who maintained his silence and appeared very cold.
When Teddy saw them, he quickly stood up. "Fourth Master, Madam." From Ms. Lawrence, it became Madam. However, Jean remained calm.
Teddy said respectfully, "The food is ready. Would you like to eat now?" "Yes." Edward nodded. With that, Teddy left. Jean focused her attention on George, who was obviously a little angry. She smiled. "Did you sleep well last night?" George's little face twisted a little in response. It seemed he did not sleep well at all. His tender voice sounded unhappy. "Why did you send me away?" She was not the one who sent him away. "You promised that even if you married Fourth Master Swan, you would not abandon me." George questioned. "Why did you send me away on the first night?" "I'm sorry," Jean apologized. George's small brows furrowed. "It won't happen again," Jean said with an expectant look in her eyes, hoping for forgiveness. George, who was very angry, thought he would ignore Jean the entire day today. However, seeing Jean's sudden show of weakness, he compromised. He bit his small lips stubbornly. Jean said, "Last night." She did not know how to explain it to George, but she had to promise him, it won't happen again. Even so, George still did not relent. At that moment, Edward, who was sitting next to Jean, suddenly said, "You have to understand your mother." "Why should I understand her?" George threw a tantrum. He was fine with Jean, but he was really angry with Fourth Master Swan. However, Edward did not seem to mind. Instead, he said by enunciating each word clearly, "Because your mother and I are going to give you a little sister." Jean was speechless. When did she say she was going to give him a little sister? George's eyes widened. At that moment, he was clearly shocked. "Don't you want a little sister?" Edward seduced him. George did not speak. "She'll be very cute and soft. She'll even call you Big Brother in her baby voice," Edward continued. It was obvious that he was looking forward to it. George shook his head and rejected him coldly. "I don't like little brats." Edward smiled. He was not angry at all and even looked good when he smiled. "It's all right, I like it," Edward replied. George thought, "What does that have to do with me?" He did not like Fourth Master Swan to begin with, and now he did not like him even more. "Otherwise, why do you think I like you so much?" Edward said in a gentle tone. George was stunned, and the next second, his face turned red. The redness on his small face was very obvious, but he still looked good. Edward touched George's small head and said, "Of course, the person I like the most is still your mother." Jean pursed her lips. How could Fourth Master Swan flirt so naturally? Fortunately, Teddy came over at that time. Otherwise, Jean had a feeling that she, too, would blush. Was the guy planning to kill all of them, young or old? Teddy said respectfully, "Fourth Master, Madam, the food is ready." Edward held Jean's hand and stood up. "I didn't know when Fourth Master and Madam would wake up, so the young master and I went ahead and ate first." Okay, Edward nodded. Then, he walked toward the dining room while holding Jean's hand. Teddy wanted to follow, but Edward suddenly said, Teddy, take good care of the young master. It meant that he should not follow them. Yes, Teddy immediately stopped in his tracks. Jean turned her eyes to the side to look at Edward. Seeing that fourth Master Swan was now calling George young master, it seemed he had really accepted George and her. They sat at the dining table, both famished. On the day of their wedding yesterday, they ate very little because they were too busy. Moreover, they had consumed a lot of energy last night in bed, and they slept for an entire day today. Jean was so hungry that she buried her head in her food, gobbling it all down. She did not want to hide her hunger either. Then, she felt a burning gaze staring at her and paused. She put down her chopsticks, took a napkin, and wiped the corner of her mouth elegantly. Her civilized and polite look was a drastic change from her gobbling down her food just now. She wiped the corner of her mouth and looked up. Fourth Master, what are you looking at? Ed, he said. Huh? Jean startled. Chapter 348. Madam, Mrs., Wife, or Jeannie? Call me Ed. However, she could not bring herself to say it.
She felt that word had become very erotic because of what they did last night. Moreover, she found the word Ed too intimate, and she would not be used to saying it. Say it to me. Having not received a reply, a certain someone started to make his request. Fourth Master. Edward frowned, and the next second, he said firmly, Ed.
Fourth Master. Ms. Lawrence. Jean looked at him, speechless. She found Fourth Master Swan very childish sometimes. So you want me to call you Ms. Lawrence the entire time? Edward raised his eyebrows as if saying, if you don't change the way you call me, I won't to you either. That was childish. Jean gritted her teeth as she opened her mouth to say, Edward. Edward raised his eyebrows. You didn't agree when I told you to call me Jean either. In that case, let's compromise, Edward. Jean's tone did not allow for any rebuttal.
Edward chuckled at Jean's temper and nodded. He could not reject any of the short-tempered Jean's requests anyway.
Then, the two of them lowered their heads and ate. Since Jean was feeling a little full, she slowed down and ate more politely. What plans do you have next? At the quiet dining table, Edward asked. Jean did not quite understand his question. Do you have anything important to attend to for the next few days? Edward became impatient. Fourth Master, Jean pursed her lips. Edward. Yes, the person whose name was called had a bright smile on his face. What was there to be happy about being called his name? Do you have any plans? Jean asked. If you don't, I do. I have to go to work. Only then did Jean understand him. She really did have to go to work. The e-commerce project was still in the pilot stage, and the progress could not be delayed. Once that matter was settled, she would have to make a move at the senior management of the Lawrence enterprise. If she wanted to control an enterprise, besides having enough shares, she also had to buy the hearts of all the people and control the operation of the entire enterprise. Edward did not answer, which to Jean was acquiescence. Hence, she naturally did not say anything more. After dinner, Jean spent time with George chatting on the open-air balcony in Bamboo Garden. Edward did not disturb their mother-son time either and watched TV in the hall. However, from time to time, he would take a few glances outside. It must have been difficult last night, Jean said to George. George bit his lip. In fact, he did feel pretty upset. I didn't know Fourth Master Swan would send you to Old Master Swan's place. Jean looked at her son helplessly. If she had known earlier, she would have stopped Edward. Actually, George wanted to say something but stopped. Jean's eyes moved slightly. Grandpa Swan was good to me, George suddenly said. Huh? Jean was surprised. George was usually not one to judge a person. He read me a fairy tale last night, George said. Jean found it a little unbelievable. No matter how hard she tried, she could not think of such a scene. Although I don't think it was a good story, but... George bit his lips. I think he's very attentive. Is that so? Jean would not have believed what he said if she did not hear it with her own ears. Yes, George nodded again. Jean's heart did a flip. However, it would not expect less of the shrewd swans. She smiled faintly. Mom, will we leave this place? Will you leave Fourth Master Swan? George was still a child, after all, so there were some things that he could not keep to himself. Jean fell silent, not knowing how to reply. You really like Fourth Master Swan, right? George was very certain. Jean pursed her lips. She said, George, feelings are not the only thing. If I have to decide, I will choose how to protect us. George did not quite understand what she said. After that, Jean stood up from the sofa and said, it's getting late. It's time to go to bed. Okay. George did not ask any further as he was not one who would ask a lot of questions. Jean held George's hand. In the hall, Edward was still watching television, and when he saw them come in, his gaze fell on them. Fourth. Edward, I'll tuck George in bed. Edward nodded. Jean held George's hand and brought him upstairs. After she accompanied him to wash up, George lay on the huge bed. Do you need me to stay with you till you've fallen asleep? Jean asked George while pulling the blanket up for him. George shook his head. Jean knew that George was a very independent child. Hence, she bent down and planted a kiss on George's forehead. Good night. Chapter 349. Madam, Mrs., Wifey, or Jeannie. Good night, Jean said and left. The moment she left, George suddenly called out to her, Mom. You won't leave me behind again, right? It seemed like he was now traumatized. She said, of course, no matter who she left behind, it would never be him. With that, Jean closed the door. It was getting late. Although she had slept all day and was not sleepy, she should return to the room. When she was at the door to Edward's room, she still felt a little unsettled. However, she gritted her teeth and pushed open the door, only to see that Edward had returned to the room. He had even showered and was lying on the huge bed, reading a book. Jean frowned. Wasn't he watching TV downstairs? Now, they were in a closed room again. She quietly composed herself and walked straight into the bathroom. Edward looked at Jean, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a faint smile. She did not take too long in the shower today, probably because she did not feel as conflicted as she was last night. She came out wearing a set of reserved pajamas, climbed into Edward's bed, and sat beside him. They were not too far away from each other. Edward glanced at her as she took out her phone and started going through some of the messages on it. Then, he turned around and focused his attention back on the book. Suddenly, the two of them looked like an old couple who had lived together for many years. The scene looked very harmonious. Jean was not sleepy and did not want to disturb Edward's reading. That was why she sat beside him and looked at her phone. There were some messages from her project team staff congratulating her. She replied, thank you, to them one by one. After that, she opened the news app. She had not looked at her phone since yesterday, so she did not know how big of a thing Edward and her wedding was. Her eyes moved when she saw the headline, rows of cars filled with flowers, Jeannie, my heart. The big headline was obviously about their wedding. She took a deep breath, adjusted her somewhat uncontrollable emotions, and clicked open the content, which was a detailed description of the wedding. Her eyes were fixed on the spectacular scenery of the vehicles outside her house to pick her up. Seeing an aerial photo of it, it really did take her aback. It turned out that was what Monica meant when she said, rows of cars filled with flowers. Edward had really done so much for her. At that moment, she saw hundreds of thousands of comments below, all of them filled with the words, jealousy, envy, and hate. From what she experienced yesterday, she could tell that the wedding was grand. However, when she saw a picture of the rows of cars filled with flowers, she was shocked again. Her eyes were fixed on the screen. For a long time, she was so immersed in her own world that she did not even notice the man beside her was staring straight at her. Not until, is the news better looking than me? The sudden male voice startled Jean. Instinctively, Jean closed the news app. You've been staring at it for 10 minutes now. A certain someone sounded dissatisfied. Jean pursed her lips. Edward Said, are you touched? Jean looked up. Some people really were very arrogant. She said, no, I was calculating how much money you used.
Speechless, Edward's mouth twitched. If it were money, I might have liked it more, Jean said on purpose.
I see. Edward nodded as if he finally understood something. Then, he turned around and extended his long arm to the drawer beside the bed. Jean frowned. At that moment, she saw Edward take a document out from the drawer before handing it to her.
Jean looked at him. In the end, she took it and opened the folder. When she saw the original shares transfer of the Swan Enterprise, her heart skipped a beat.
The wedding gift that Edward mentioned earlier, she had forgotten all about it, and she did not want it at all.
Look at the content first and then sign it. As Edward saw that, he gave her a pen.
Jean pursed her lips and focused her attention on the document. She thought the shares would come with lots of terms on it. However, there was none. It was an unconditional transfer. It even stated clearly that once the shares were transferred, they would be exclusive to Jean and would not be included in the marital assets. It meant that if they were divorced, that 8% of the original shares would still be hers. She stared at Edward. Is there a problem? Edward asked. Aren't you afraid that I will abscond with the money? Jean was very serious. I'm not, Edward Said straightforwardly. Jean frowned. I'm sure you won't be able to escape. I'm more powerful than you think, Jean reminded.
I know, Edward nodded. If he knew, why would he still give her the shares unconditionally?
I know you will fall in love with me, Edward added. Jean looked at him. Sooner or later, she did not refute because she could not. As Jean took the pen from Edward's hand, she said, sometimes, feelings are worthless. Yes. In the face of benefits, feelings were worthless, and that was why she accepted Edward's gift.
Edward looked at her and watched as she signed her name.
Just like that, the transfer was effective. After signing it, the two of them went to sleep, with some distance between them. Their backs were facing each other at first, but Jean suddenly turned around toward Edward. She stared at his broad back. In the dark night sky, she felt that he looked lonely. Her small hands tugged on his pajamas. A certain person's body moved. I want to thank you. Edward did not move. I don't think I can ever repay you with all those shares. Hence, she wanted to give herself to him in return. Edward turned around and looked at her. He said, if I knew this would happen, I would have taken out the document last night. If so, she would not have rejected him, right? As he leaned closer to her body, she was clearly a little nervous. He said, but, more than anything, I hope you would repay me with your love. Jean was stunned. After that, the man hugging her was still. Very late at night, before Jean felt sleepy, she muttered, was it not enough last night? A certain someone was at a loss for words. Then, they went at it all night. Chapter 350. George's parent-child sports day. The next day, Jean was a little sleepy because she only fell asleep very, very late last night. She was still struggling to get up, debating whether she should get up to go to work, when she heard a voice in her ear, telling her, it's still early. You can sleep a little longer. As if she was possessed, she really did lay in that certain someone's arms and fell asleep again. Getting used to something was a very scary thing. She was clearly uncomfortable sleeping on the same bed as him last night, but today, it seemed as if it was a matter of course. Then, she turned over and had a feeling that something was wrong. The next second, she opened her eyes and was instantly startled awake.
Not sleepy anymore, a voice whispered in her ear.
Jean's entire body stiffened. Rather than feeling she was in danger, she was shocked by the scene before her eyes. Why was she in midair at that moment? How did she wake up in a place filled with enchanting clouds? What in the world? We're on the way to our honeymoon destination, Edward told her straight. Jean scanned her surroundings and looked at the man in the cockpit who was controlling the helicopter. Why am I here? Jean asked. Logically speaking, she could not have been in such deep sleep that she did not even know she had been kidnapped. Even if they left home halfway through, she was, after all, a professional killer. It was impossible for her not to have that level of sensitivity. I carried you here, Edward, who was in the cockpit, said bluntly. Didn't I wake up? Jean gritted her teeth. If Kingsley knew that happened, she would probably be beaten to death.
You did wake up. However, you fell asleep peacefully again because you were in my arms. Edward sighed smugly. Jeannie, you seem to like my embrace very much.
Like, my *SS. However, on second thought, perhaps she was indeed too tired because she slept pretty late last night. In that case, it should still be early now. She lowered her head and took a look at her phone. As expected, it was only past 6 a.m. in the morning. That guy, what was wrong with him? What did he say just now? Yes, honeymoon. When did he say that they were going on a honeymoon? She looked at Edward. Where are we going? Balti Island, Edward Said.
Going abroad. Yes, a certain person replied. How long will we be gone? A week. Didn't I say I have a lot of work to attend to? Jean was furious.
The honeymoon is more important. Is work not important? Jean burst out in rage. The next time he did anything, could he let her know in advance? The honeymoon is the most important. In that case, why did he ask her about her arrangements yesterday? She realized that sometimes, she could never say good things about Edward.
She gritted her teeth and said, where's George?
He's at home, Edward Said, as if it was a matter of course. Great. Now Jean was so angry that she was about to explode. She had just promised George that she would not abandon him yesterday, and what was she doing now? She had gone back on her words first thing in the morning. At that moment, she really felt like strangling Edward to death. Don't worry. Teddy will take good care of him. Edward did not turn her head to look at her, but he explained as if he could feel her emotions. Jean was very angry. It was true. She was infuriated by Edward's series of actions. She said fiercely, can we turn around? No, fourth Master Swan. Call me Edward. Fourth Master Swan. Jean said stubbornly. You can call me whatever you like. A certain person suddenly compromised.
Suddenly, she did not know what to say. In fact, she was so angry that she could not say anything. Hence, she turned her head angrily and looked out the window, ignoring the man.
Edward could also feel her emotions, and the corner of his mouth curled into a smile. In the end, he drove the helicopter directly to the international airport and landed it at the airport's designated parking. By then, there were already people waiting for them, and quite a number of them at that. Edward got off the helicopter first, walked over, and stretched his hand out to help Jean to get down. However, Jean got off the helicopter and avoided his hand. Edward smiled. Even in the face of her temper, his face was full of affection. His long legs caught up with her, and he wrapped his arms around her shoulders domineeringly. Jean was stunned for a moment before she resisted him. Show me some respect, Edward suddenly whispered. Jean frowned. Many people are watching, and in any case, I am the legendary fourth Master Swan of Harkin, Edward explained. Jean sneered. How dare he have the nerve to say he was the legendary fourth Master Swan? Isn't fourth Master Swan cold and aloof? How shameless was he? Well, I'm not anymore because of you, no? Hey guys, don't forget to hit the like, share, subscribe button and turn on the notification bell icon for more content like this. It helps the channel a lot. Thank you.